I'm sorry, Maggie. Don't be. You didn't force me to feel anything. It's what I do, Hollis. What I'm meant to do. Suffer? Understand suffering. Maggie sighed. It's all right, really. Right now I'm more interested in Annie and what she said to you. Is that why I'm here? Yes. There are things she wants me to tell you. She was the one who told me to ask for you in the first place. She didn't say why, just that I needed to talk to you. I had wondered how you knew my name. The police usually keep that quiet. Annie told me. And a few hours ago she pleaded with me to help her. Help her do what? Contact me? Bring you here. Tell you. Tell me what? Tell you about the next victim. Chapter 14. John waited for Maggie, where he had before, at the doorway of the waiting room on the floor where Hollis Templeton's room was. The area was as quiet as it always seemed to be, and no one disturbed his thoughts. He almost wished someone would. It should have been a relief to be told that his sister hadn't killed herself after all, that he'd been right about that much. It had been one thing he'd been determined to prove, but he still couldn't prove it. And even if he believed Maggie— Did he believe Maggie? It all seemed so incredible. And yet he had seen with his own eyes her intense physical and emotional reaction to places where violence had occurred, had seen how she suffered right along with the victims she tried to help. And he had seen a painting of a brutally murdered woman, a woman he was certain was Tara Jameson. Yet the missing woman hadn't yet been abducted when Maggie had painted her horribly mutilated image, while in the grip of some frightening, virtually unconscious nightmare state that chilled him to even imagine. Maggie hadn't been pretending or performing. He was certain of that. Even if there had been a reason for her to feign such an incredible ability, and he couldn't think of a single one, why would anyone go to the extremes Maggie so obviously suffered just to maintain an inexplicable pretense? No. He was sure Maggie and her abilities were genuine. With every minute he spent with her, he was more and more convinced of her basic honesty and apparently karmic need to help people. And if she was telling the truth about everything else, why would she lie about Christina's death? He realized after considering it carefully that he believed she was telling the truth about that as well. Something in her voice, in her face, even in her reluctance to tell him all this time what she felt, what she knew, had convinced him. He believed she had on some level shared, even felt, the moment of his sister's death. And because he believed that, believed in Maggie's abilities, he had to also finally admit to himself that he believed several other distinctly disturbing facts. Someone else, possibly the man who had attacked her, was responsible for Christina's death and had, in fact, murdered her in cold blood. Quentin really could see the future. And this bastard they all wanted caught and caged, this man who preyed on women out of some obscene need no sane mind could understand, this evil beast with a human face, had lived before, and killed before. Christ, what could a man do with that kind of knowledge? His entire life John had believed only in what he could see or touch or feel with his hands, what he absolutely knew to be real. Never a religious man, he had viewed faith as superstition, and the so-called paranormal as nothing more than mysticism dressed up by wishful thinking and pseudo-science to look rational. But faced with this, all this, he was beginning to appreciate just how little he genuinely understood the very nature of reality, Because if the world he lived in could produce seers and empaths and human monsters reborn to torment victims in life after life, only because someone had failed to stop them when fate decreed, then all the certainties of his own life had been built upon shifting sands. It was a sobering realization, and yet surprisingly exhilarating as well. He honestly hadn't thought there were any mysteries left to be explored. Not for him. With his business empire virtually running itself these days, his goals and ambitions long ago reached and even surpassed, his life had taken on a predictable and unexciting routine he hadn't quite defined as boring. But boring it undoubtedly was. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt so alive, so caught up in a unique and challenging situation. He also understood for the first time why Quentin had joined the FBI when he had. Not because he considered himself a traditional cop, a notion John had always found unbelievable given his friend's brash, thoroughly independent, and often reckless nature, to say nothing of his occasionally cockeyed sense of humor. And not because he had a law degree he didn't quite know what to do with. No, he had joined because Noah Bishop had been quietly recruiting qualified people with paranormal abilities for a very specialized unit of investigators, and that had appealed to both Quentin's innate curiosity and sense of justice, and his need to make use of a unique talent the rest of the world found incomprehensible, and even frightening, if they believed in it at all. "Some friend I've been," John muttered beneath his breath. It said a lot for Quentin's nature that he had remained a loyal friend, both humorous and unoffended all these years despite John's patent disbelief. John wasn't so sure what it said about his own nature, that he was incredibly stubborn, perhaps. Perhaps. "John." He straightened away from the door jamb, surprised that he'd been so preoccupied he hadn't heard Maggie approach. As soon as he saw her face, he took a quick step toward her, almost instinctively. "What is it? What's happened?" She tucked her sketch pad under one arm and reached for her phone, her smile a little strained. "Hollis thought she might have remembered something, but it's nothing we didn't already know." The lie came easily to her lips, but she went on immediately just in case John's acute perception, where she was concerned, told him more than she wanted him to know. "I'm worried about her, though. She and Ellen Randall are the only surviving victims so far. Ellen's still blind and no threat to this animal, but Hollis might be able to see again, and I'm afraid that would disturb him enough that he might try to come after her again. I think she should be guarded, just in case he finds out about it." "Sounds like a good idea." "Yeah. Andy, it's Maggie. Are you guys making a night of it?" "I know. I'd just as soon work as try to sleep, too. Listen, do you have somebody you can post here at the hospital, outside Hollis's room? I don't want to scare her, but I think she should be protected." "No, but if this bastard finds out she might be able to see again—" "Yeah, she could be a threat to him. Clear it with the hospital, okay?" "Thanks." She listened for a moment, then closed her eyes briefly, and they were bleak when she opened them again. "I see. So he's not giving them even a chance to survive now, and not wasting much time between victims. He must have grabbed Tara Jameson within hours of killing Samantha Mitchell. Yeah, a whole new ballgame. No, John's still with me, so we'll come together. Right." She listened a moment longer, then frowned and said, "Is that Luke I hear?" Her face tightened, and she said in a voice John remembered from their first meeting, "Do me a favor, and tell him I'd appreciate it if he hung around until I got there. I want to talk to him." "Yeah. Thanks, Andy." Watching her drop the phone back into her pocket, John said, "Do you think Drummond will listen to you?" It didn't even occur to Maggie that John hadn't needed to ask what she had in mind. "I think he'd damned well better. Stubborn is one thing, but this has gone way too far to keep bumping up against Luke's pride. Even he has to see that much now. I gather they found Samantha Mitchell's body. Yes. He'd killed her outright. She drew a breath. Cut her throat. John watched her steadily. Then I'd say it's way past time to pool our resources and manpower and work together. Maggie nodded. Definitely, whether Luke Drummond likes it or not. You've got my vote, and I have a hunch Andy is going to agree with you too. She nodded. I'll make sure first, okay it with Andy, and then I've got a few home truths for Luke. If I have to, I'll go to the chief, and I'll make sure Luke knows it. Blame me for the fact that Quentin and Kendra are already in town, he told her. He can bitch at me all he wants without hurting any of the rest of you. Are you sure? Positive. And if you need any extra ammo, you might try telling him the governor owes me a favor that I've been very hesitant to call in. So far. Is that true? Yeah. I was saving it in case Drummond got nasty and tried to shut me out of the investigation entirely. But we might as well play every card we've got. Maggie nodded again. Okay, I'll use it if I have to. John put an arm around her, partly because she looked exhausted, and partly because he needed to touch her, and said, Let's go. Scott came into the conference room and sat down in a chair across from Jennifer. Beats me what's going on, but it looks serious. Andy's in a huddle with John at his desk, and Maggie is in Drummond's office. The door is closed, but you can still hear Drummond. Jennifer grimaced. If he's pissed enough to be yelling at Maggie, it must really be serious. He's more careful with her than he is with any of us. Because the chief is so high on her. Yeah. Jennifer looked at her watch. Nearly 11. Andy said we should put ourselves back on the clock if we're planning to hang around. Suits me, Scott said. All I do at home is stare at the walls trying to figure this thing out. I know what you mean. Any luck finding that transient? Not so far. I called some of the other shelters in the area, but they don't have anybody matching his description or claiming the name David Robeson. You don't really think this guy saw a ghost, do you, Jen? I think he might have seen something, at the very least something that shook him up. Because Terry Lynch says so? He's a good cop, Scott. Sure he is. I'm just wondering what a drunken transient could possibly have seen to make him believe he'd seen a ghost. Smoke? Light hitting a patch of mist just right? Somebody dressed all in white? All good possibilities, she admitted. But maybe he saw something else, Scott. From what little we do know, this bastard may be wearing a mask, at least while he's with the victims. One of those hard plastic masks. I'd think that would look plenty creepy, even if you were cold sober. I guess. Jennifer sighed. I know it's a long shot, but what have we got to lose checking it out? Scott sighed as well. Nothing. Exactly. Jennifer reached for the phone. I have a couple more shelters on my list that should be taking calls even this late. Besides, even long shots finish first every once in a while. Not when you bet on them, Scott replied, in a voice of wry experience. I don't like being threatened, Maggie. Drummond's voice was level, a distinct change from his roaring of only moments before. On her feet in front of his desk, she leaned forward and planted her hand squarely on his blotter. No? Then stop making it necessary, Luke. This thing has gotten way out of hand. And if you were honest with yourself, instead of so bullheaded you refused to see reason, you'd admit it. My people can... Your people are out of their league. They're damn good cops, every one of them, but they've never had to deal with this kind of monster before. Nothing in their training or experience has prepared them for it. If you just produce a sketch... She straightened and half laughed. Fine. Blame it on me. I don't give a shit. Say your sketch artist just couldn't do her job, and that's why you can't catch this animal." He had the grace to flush, but his eyes remained angry. "We're doing everything in our power, everything that can possibly be done, and the chief agrees with me. Why call in the FBI when we don't have so much as a piece of conclusive evidence for them to fucking investigate? Listen to me. You're a hunter. Think about it. What's the logical thing to do when you're after a particular kind of animal? You look for experienced hunters. When you have a bear problem, you damned well find somebody who knows how to hunt bears. Cops hunt criminals. And, hey, surprise, we catch them, too." Maggie deliberately dropped her voice to a conversational tone, unthreatening, even unemotional. "Yes, you do. But this isn't just another criminal, Luke. That's where you're misjudging the situation. This is an animal, a human monster going to inhuman extremes to hide his evil face even from his dying victims. And when you go after a monster, you need somebody who knows how to hunt them." "Like the FBI?" "No, like a very specialized unit within the FBI." She allowed her voice to sharpen. "A group of highly skilled, trained, and dedicated people who don't care what the headlines read after they've done their job and gone. They don't care who gets the political points. All they care about is putting monsters in cages where they belong." Again, Drummond flushed slightly, this time at the biting comment about his political aspirations, but all he said was, "I've never heard of this specialized unit." "No, you probably haven't. Like I said, they don't seek publicity. The opposite, if anything." She watched that sink in, and added, "But if you'll check back through the law enforcement agency bulletins the Bureau sends out, I'm sure you'll find them mentioned a few times. They're the Special Crimes Unit, SCU, formed to assist local law enforcement to handle unusually challenging violent crimes. Their success record is quite impressive. They have a mandate never to interfere with local law enforcement, only to advise and provide support and assistance, when requested to do so." "How come you know so much about them?" "Someone I know nearly joined that unit a couple of years ago." She shrugged. "What I can tell you is that they're good, Luke. They're very, very good." "I still don't see what they could do that we can't," Drummond muttered. Maggie knew he was going to give in, however grudgingly, so she kept her response matter-of-fact. "Like I said, they've hunted monsters before. Maybe they'll have a take on this the rest of us would never think of. But even if they don't, the murder of Samantha Mitchell raises the stakes, doesn't it, Luke? People are going to be asking what more you're doing to stop a sadistic rapist who has now become a brutal murderer. Call these expert monster hunters in, and you've got an answer for them." "Shit." He leaned back in his chair until it creaked, scowling. "You know it's the right thing to do. Even more, it's the smart thing to do. Luke, a few days ago you asked me to try harder to give you a picture of this monster. Now I'm telling you that I can't do it alone. I can't do it just by talking to blinded victims. I need help. I need people who can help me to understand the way he thinks." "Is that why you're so cozy with Garrett these days?" he asked sourly. Ignoring the implication, she said, "As a matter of fact, John decided a few days ago that if you couldn't use the resources of this FBI unit, then maybe he could. You know how determined he is to find the man who attacked his sister, whatever it takes. He happens to have a friend in the unit, and the friend is here in Seattle along with his partner, on their own time and off the books. We have them to thank for how quickly Samantha Mitchell's body was found." She had been reasonably sure that last would keep him from exploding, and she was right. But she nevertheless didn't give him time to start sputtering. "Nobody's stepping on your authority, Luke, and all of us have only one goal in mind. We just want to stop this monster before he kills again. Give us all the tools we need to do that. Be a smart politician as well as a smart cop, and call the unit in officially. give Andy the okay to open up the investigation to them. I promise you won't regret it. I'd better not, he growled. Send him in. Maggie didn't allow a shadow of triumph to show, and didn't waste time leaving the office. The bullpen was less busy than usual at this late hour, but she was still aware of considerable covert attention as she made her way to Andy's desk, where he and John waited. Not that she was surprised by the interest. Drummond's voice had rattled the windows, so it had undoubtedly been heard out here. He wants you, she told Andy. He'll probably bluster a bit, but bottom line you'll get the okay to bring Quentin and Kendra in officially. Did you have to promise your first child? Andy asked dryly as he rose. No, but I may be pouring brimstone out of my shoes tonight. He grinned at her, then headed for Drummond's office. Well done, John said. Here, sit down. He decided not to add that she looked very tired, and he was worried about her. She did, taking the other visitor's chair. I think I'd almost rather interview a dozen witnesses than argue with Luke. He's about as bull-headed as they come. John smiled faintly. You convinced him. That's the important thing. Let's hope so. She smiled in return. Are Quentin and Kendra likely to be up? Oh, yeah. They're both night owls, especially during an ongoing investigation. Are you sure enough of Drummond to call them in right now? Maggie nodded. I don't think we have any time to lose. Do you? John reached for the phone. Wednesday, November 7th. By the time they were all assembled in the conference room, it was after midnight. Drummond had left for home some time before, saying he'd meet those agents the following day, and many of the detectives who had been working on the investigation were also absent, either off duty and home or else out doing what they could to find the latest missing woman, Tara Jameson. So it was what had become of the core police investigation team. Andy, Scott, and Jennifer, who were introduced to Quentin and Kendra, and they wasted no time in getting to work. Quentin prowled around studying the photos, sketches, and descriptions pinned to the bulletin board, while Kendra reported that their search of every available database for similar crimes going back more than 6 months had turned up nothing, even remotely close anywhere in the country, indicating that he had indeed begun attacking women only 6 months ago. But there's this, Quentin said, tapping one of the bulletin boards. Absolutely amazing. Who took the intuitive leap and dug these up? Andy nodded to Scott and Jennifer. They did. Scott explained their thinking about a rapist with a too-developed ritual. When he was finished, Quentin was the first to speak, saying thoughtfully, You colored outside the lines when you were a kid, didn't you? Scott stared at him for a moment, then caught the twinkle in the agent's eyes and grinned reluctantly. Well, yeah. I'm not surprised. Very creative and intuitive thinking, and it is a perfectly rational explanation given the facts as we know them. Copycats are getting depressingly common these days, so maybe the guy did decide to borrow someone else's ritual and used a series of old, unsolved crimes to learn from. John glanced at Maggie, but she was listening gravely and showed no inclination to interrupt, and he wasn't about to. Even if she was right in her incredible claim that they were dealing with an evil mind reborn, John didn't see how that knowledge could do anything except confuse the investigation, assuming it was even believed. No, they were after a flesh-and-blood killer now, whatever else he was, and that was the quarry they had to hunt down. Andy said, Jen's trying to run down a witness who might have seen something in the area where Hollis Templeton was found, but he's a transient, so finding him won't be easy. The only other new point we have is Maggie's belief that this bastard knows the latest victim, Tara Jameson. Jennifer frowned at her. What makes you think that? Maggie glanced at Andy, hesitated, then shrugged. Sometimes I feel things. A sixth sense, if you will. They call it an empathic sense. Which explains a lot, Andy said to the other two detectives after a moment. That's how she gets those incredibly accurate sketches, how she communicates so well with victims. Isn't it, Maggie? When you tell them you know how they feel, you mean it literally. Usually. It's stronger with some people than others, but most victims of violent crime they're traumatized. Their emotions much more powerful than normal. I pick that up pretty easily. Do you know what we're feeling right now? Jennifer demanded. Maggie shrugged. In a general sense, yes. That's all I get without physical contact. Just a faint impression. Not much more than I'd get anyway from watching your expressions or listening to your voices. Tell them the rest, Quentin murmured. She looked at him, then at the others. Violent emotion is just another kind of energy, and it lingers in some places, almost as if it soaks into the walls and floors, at least for a while. Sometimes, if I walk through a place where something violent has happened, I connect with the victim or attacker, feel a lot of what they felt at the time. Which is why you picked up on the arguments and stuff at the Mitchell house, Andy said, and when she nodded, quickly listed the impressions Maggie had gained from walking through that house, so that his detectives understood what they were talking about. Maggie said, in each case, one or both of the Mitchells were experiencing emotions more intensely than usual. The argument about the parrot was pretty fierce, as was the one Thomas Mitchell had with his father-in-law, and the broken mirror cut Samantha's hand, which caused her a lot of pain. Jennifer said, There've been a lot of violent emotions in this building. Do you feel that? Grimacing slightly, Maggie said, Until recently, all I felt was a kind of skin-tingling sensation, like the way you feel when there's too much static electricity in the air. But it's getting more intense as time passes. At the hospital, too. You didn't say anything, John said, not quite accusingly. What could I say? She shrugged. It's almost like background noise now. A low hum of energy just beneath the level of consciousness. Usually, anyway. Sometimes a particular impression gets through more strongly. For instance? There was a challenging note to Jennifer's question. Maggie glanced at Quentin, who said wryly, Gotta jump through a hoop or two. It never fails. Yeah. Maggie saw a bit of color creep into Jennifer's cheeks, but she answered the other woman's question as if she didn't see the gauntlet thrown at her feet. For instance, you had someone you suspect of burglary in here really early today. Tuesday. The detective working the case, Harrison, is convinced this guy has been breaking into some pretty high-class homes in the city. Problem is, you've searched his place, and you've staked out the known fences, and so far found nothing. Yeah, Andy said. So? So when he was in here today, your suspect was really worried you'd find out about the storage building he rents under his brother's name. Scott said, Jesus, I want to run tell Mike Harrison. I'm afraid I'll miss something. Tell him later, Andy ordered. He eyed Maggie. Any other little tidbits you want to pass on? Well, that elderly woman you suspect of killing her husband didn't. No? No. But she did dispose of his body, buried him in the woods behind her house. Christ, Andy said. Why, if she didn't kill him? He wasn't insured, and she needs the Social Security checks to keep coming, so she tried to pretend he was still alive. Into the silence, Quentin said, Sometimes I really hate working for the government. Scott drew a breath and said, Well, I say we hire Maggie to sit by the front door all day. She smiled at him. So I can get bits of info you guys would have found out on your own anyway? I'm not so sure about that, Andy said. But even assuming you were willing, we'd have to figure out some way of making your impressions sound like legitimate leads, and I have a hunch that wouldn't be easy. Take it from me, Quentin said. It wouldn't be. And if what you were doing became public knowledge, there'd be privacy issues, Maggie finished, at the very least. With the possible exception of cops with difficult cases to crack, nobody would be at all happy to think there was someone reading them like a book every time they walked through the door, and so invading their privacy without permission or legal justification. She shrugged. Anyway, that's how I know that the rapist knows Tara Jameson. There was a strong sense of familiarity when he grabbed her, much more than there would have been if his only knowledge of her came from watching her. Andy looked at the others, then nodded. That's good enough for me. I know it's late, but I say we start pulling together everything we know about Tara Jameson's life. Family, friends, neighbors, co-workers. You all know the drill. Wake people up if you have to. If there's any chance at all we might be able to find her before this bastard can play his twisted games, I say we pull out all the stops and go for it. Nobody disagreed. Chapter 15. It wasn't at all unusual for Beau to be working in his studio after midnight, but it was rare for him to be working with his eyes closed. It was also something he wasn't happy about and wouldn't have willingly been doing except by urgent request. The last time he'd tried it, the resulting painting had given him nightmares for weeks, and it was the only example of his work he had ever destroyed. "It's not just spatters, is it?" he asked, less hopeful than resigned. "No, not just spatters. I wish it was. I know. You know too damn much. One thing I don't know is how you're able to use the artistic version of automatic writing and talk coherently at the same time. I don't know that either, and it freaks me out to think too much about it. Reminds me of that old horror movie about the pianist who got himself a new pair of hands. Someone else's. Now you're freaking me out. I'd like to think I could, but you've seen too much to be bothered by anything I can do. Don't be so sure of that." Beau half-turned his head, eyes still closed and paintbrush still moving skillfully, and frowned. "Am I going to want to look at this thing when I'm done?" "No." "Oh, Christ. Can I stop now?" "I don't know. Can you?" "No, damn it. There's still something—" Beau gritted his teeth and kept painting. He hated this. It was infinitely preferable to have a vision, even if it made his head ache for an hour afterward. Preferable to have bits and pieces of knowledge or information just pop into his head, unbidden. Either of those he could deal with. But this was major league creepy. He'd wondered more than once if it was really his own mind, his own skills, guiding his hands when he painted this way. Considering the finished products, that was a scary thought. But even scarier was the possibility he wasn't in control in any sense, that someone else was speaking through his skills, using them to get a message out. Out of hell, he sometimes thought. "Am I the only one you know who can do this?" he demanded. "Is that why you come to me?" "You're the best I've found. Artistic expertise matched by psychic ability. But in this case, it wasn't either skill that brought me here. You know that." "Then why ask me to do this?" "I use every tool I can get my hands on. You also know that." "And to hell with the cost to me, huh?" "You can pay the bill." "You're a bastard, Galen. Do you know that?" "As a matter of fact, I do." Beau was silent for several minutes, then said, "Maggie's just beginning to find out what she can do." "Yes, I saw the painting. So you've been breaking into her house too, huh?" "You should both invest in a little security." "Obviously." Beau painted for several more minutes before the brush finally wavered and his hand fell. He turned his back to the easel before opening his eyes and walking to the work table, where Galen leaned to clean the brush and his palette. "It's almost over, Beau. If you're trying to make me feel better, that won't do it." "Sorry. Best I can do." "Yeah, right." Beau cleaned his hands on a rag, paying close attention to the task, then said, "I'm going to put the coffee on." "Late for caffeine." "Well, if you think I want to sleep tonight, you're crazy. Cover that thing when you're done looking at it, all right?" Without waiting for a response, and without so much as a glance at the painting, Beau left the studio. Galen looked after him for a moment, then straightened and approached the easel almost warily. He stood back some distance from it, powerful arms crossed over his chest as he studied a painting so complex and skillfully done it was almost impossible to believe the artist's eyes had been closed the entire time. Almost impossible to believe. Far from Beau's usual and rather famous impressionist work, this painting didn't shimmer with light, but rather with darkness. Bold strokes of black, deep shades of maroon and slate gray and brown made up an indistinct yet oddly unnerving background, lightened only by the amorphous, flesh-toned faces and forms in the foreground. Galen considered one face in particular, one of the few that was clearly recognizable. It wore a twisted expression of pain, wide eyes already going empty as life left them. His own rather hard mouth twisted. "Shit," he said very softly. Maggie had never been a nervous woman, but by the time John dropped her off at her home very early in the morning, it took all her resolution not to ask him to come inside with her. She told herself it was lack of sleep, but that didn't help much except to remind her he needed rest as well, and didn't need to be worrying about her safety. Worrying never did any good. She knew that. Besides, if he knew the truth, he'd want to be with her every moment, watching over her. She knew that too. And as comforting as his presence was, she had to be able to spend at least some time alone and without the distraction he presented, recharging her energies while she tried to think this thing through. At least, that was what she told herself when she went into her silent house and cautiously checked all the doors and windows before taking a long, hot shower and trying to get some sleep. But sleep didn't come easily. She dozed, waking several times with a start to find herself tense, listening for some alien sound. But there was nothing, of course. Of course. After only a few hours, she finally got up and got dressed. Not much rested. She ate only because she knew she should, then checked her garage and car as warily as she had checked her house hours before. Even when she was in the car and moving, doors locked, she didn't relax. She wondered if she ever would again. When she walked into Beau's studio a few minutes later, she was a little surprised to find him lounged back with his feet up on the table rather than working. The commissioned portrait of a Seattle businessman's wife that he'd been working on for days reposed on his easel, but from all appearances he hadn't picked up brush or palette today. "I'm taking the day off," he announced, before she could ask him. "Have some coffee. It's a fresh pot." Maggie fixed herself a cup and sat down across from him, studying his angelic face with a frown. "Not that it really shows, but I could swear you'd been up all night, too." "I didn't sleep," he admitted. "Called your house pretty late and figured you were at the station." "I was. We had a sort of war council just before midnight and ended up staying there until dawn." Briskly, she filled him in on everything that had happened since they had last talked, as usual not sure just how much he knew without being told, and finished up. "I went home a few hours ago for a nap and a shower, like most of the others." "Most?" "Andy's up for the duration, I think, and Quentin and Kendra seemed wide-eyed and energetic when I left." Beau, who knew most of the detectives Maggie worked with, at least by name, since she talked about them, nodded and said, "From what you've said about Andy, that isn't surprising. As for the two feds, unusual endurance is probably the rule rather than the exception for that unit." Eyeing him thoughtfully, Maggie said, "You never really told me why you turned Bishop down when he asked you to join a couple of years ago." Didn't I? No, and don't try to sidestep now. Quentin and Kendra haven't said anything, but I'm willing to bet they've known about the connection between you and me for days. You said yourself Bishop more or less told you that the plan was for him and his agents to keep track of the psychics they're aware of outside the unit, just in case of need. That's what he said. So they've probably known about you since they got here. She shook her head. I'll give them full marks for discretion. As far as I can tell, they haven't said a word to anybody, even John. Knowing Bishop, he'd see discretion as necessary. One of his goals was always to build the unit and earn a solid success record long before the public found out anything. Maggie nodded. Makes sense. So, why did you decide not to join up? I don't have a law degree. Which wouldn't be necessary if you went on the books as technical support for the field agents. That was another of Bishop's goals, wasn't it? To build a support team made up of people with psychic abilities and other talents that could prove useful in investigations. I'd say an artist might come in handy, especially one with a name so well known it would provide an excellent cover for any federal snooping he was doing. You've been around cops too much. You're beginning to think like them. Don't try to distract me. Why'd you say no? It's certainly the kind of thing you'd enjoy doing. Bo shrugged. Let's just say the timing wasn't right. Maggie frowned at him. It wasn't because of me, was it? Honest as always, at least when pressed, Bo said, not entirely. Anyway, you're the one Bishop would have loved to have on his team. An empathic sketch artist already accustomed to working with the police? Perfect. But I knew you had a pretty big job to finish here, and because I knew, so did he. He must be a powerful telepath. Oh, he is. Even more so these days, I hear, since he teamed up with and married another equally powerful psychic. And how did you hear? The psychic newsletter? Because I don't get that. Bo grinned at her disgruntled tone. I keep trying to tell you there are lots of connections in life. Yeah, right. That degrees of separation stuff? Sure. So I know you, and by extension everybody you know as well. It adds up. Maggie was never entirely certain if these interesting theories of Bo's were theories or universal facts he understood simply because he was unusually plugged into the universe. Okay. He grinned again. Never mind. So what's the plan for the day? I'm going to interview Ellen Randall again in about an hour. I want to check on Hollis, make sure she's all right, then back to the station and meet up with the others. See what, if anything, they've managed to find out about a possible connection in Tara Jameson's life to the man who abducted her. You shouldn't be out alone. I work best alone. You know that. Not this time, Maggie. This time, working alone is dangerous for you. I'm being careful. Are you? She conjured a smile and hoped it was reassuring. Of course I am. Besides, you know only too well that hiding won't do me any good. I have to do what I can to stop this animal. I have to. Yes, but not alone. You have to use all the tools you've been given this time. Some of them are no help at all. Broodingly, she looked down at her closed sketch pad. The irony is that this is the monster I'm supposed to stop, the reason I'm here, at least this time around. And even though I've been given an ability that's helped me stop others, it isn't helping me the least bit with him. I can't see him. I'm as blind as his victims are. And there must be a reason for that. The universe wants to piss me off? He smiled. Maybe. I've always suspected there's a real cosmic sense of humor out there. If so, it's a twisted humor, Bo. This isn't funny. I know. But there's something you have to keep in mind, Maggie. As much as you're focused on stopping this man, the universe is a huge and complicated place. The patterns all around us are made up of uncounted threads, woven in complex designs, and every thread is important to the whole. It isn't just about him. It isn't just about his victims, or the cops. Or me. He nodded. Or you. She drew a breath, then said dryly, "Thanks, Master." "You're welcome, Grasshopper." Maggie had to smile. "Well, while I keep the immensity of the universe firmly in mind, I have to go on working in my little corner of it. Any advice this time?" "Brush after every meal." "You know, you're not nearly as funny as you think you are." "No? Ah, well, one tries." "One fails. You're just grumpy because you don't get the psychic newsletter." His smile faded slightly. "Maggie, I was right about John Garrett, wasn't I?" She got up and for a moment just looked at him. Then her mouth twisted and she said, "Yeah, you were right." "Fate." "Fate. See you later, Bo." For a long time after she left, Bo sat there staring into space. Then, so reluctant that every movement was slow and careful, he got up and went to the big painting leaning against the wall, covered with a piece of heavy material so that Maggie hadn't even noticed it. Bo propped the still-covered painting on a secondary easel and stepped away for a moment, trying to prepare himself. Then he drew a deep breath and flipped back the material. A detached part of his mind noted the technique and skill displayed, seeing and accepting the unsettling fact that this was arguably the best work of his life. But that wasn't all he saw. He saw the vague yet identifiable faces and forms of what he recognized as tormented women, trapped in a dark hell of suffering, their arms reaching out desperately for help, most of them with empty eye sockets wide, open mouths pleading. He saw the hands that had destroyed the women, hands clenched into fists, hands wielding knives and holding ropes, and hands reaching out for the women as though to pull them back down into hell. For a long, long time, Bo didn't move. He stared at the painting, absorbing every brushstroke, every nuance. Ignoring the sick nausea churning in his gut, he stared until he was certain every dreadful detail was burned into his mind. Then he went and got a tool designed to cut canvas and very methodically shredded the best work he'd ever done. "Not this time," he muttered into the silence of the studio. "God damn it. Not this time." "I always end up working in boring police conference rooms," Quentin said somewhat sadly to the room at large. "And with a great hotel this time, too." "It'll keep you humble," Kendra told him. "Yeah, right." John came in then and immediately asked, "Anybody heard from Maggie?" "Not since you have," Quentin told him. "She was going to interview Ellen Randall and then stop off at the hospital to see Hollis Templeton, right?" "So she said." "Hasn't had time to do both, I'd say. And where have you been?" "Letting Drummond vent some of his spleen." Quentin grimaced. "Yeah, I thought when he was so painfully polite to us this morning that he was itching to explode." John shrugged. "I thought it'd be better for all of us if he got it out of his system." "We appreciate that," Jennifer said dryly. "I won't say it was a pleasure, but you're welcome." Obviously restless, John looked at his watch, then sat down at the conference table. "Andy's still trying to hurry the medical examiner, but it'll probably be late this afternoon before we have the results of the post-mortem on Samantha Mitchell." "I'm not surprised," Quentin said absently, prowling back and forth in front of the bulletin boards. "According to the police scanner we were listening to yesterday, there were a couple of really bad fires in the city, with fatalities. The ME's probably got more than he can handle." "Still," John said. "Still," Quentin agreed. He prowled a while longer, but when Kendra gave him a very direct look, he finally sat down across from John. Half under his breath, he said, "For somebody with a uniquely flexible mind, she gets very irritated by the smallest things." Even I was getting irritated, John told him dryly. Jennifer added, "Me too, but I wasn't going to mention it." "Then why did you?" Quentin demanded. "Everybody else did." Quentin sighed. All right. Can I help it if I'm restless? I hate this part of the job. Basically just sitting around, going through papers and scratching our heads while we wait for the bastard to make another move." He watched John look at his watch again and added, "And I'm not the only one who hates it." Ignoring that, John said, "Scott's out talking to Tara Jameson's co-workers, right?" Quentin nodded. "Kendra's been running background checks on every name we've got, but so far everyone in her life looks clean. The fiancé definitely is, with a strong alibi to boot. No family here in the city. Andy has a couple of detectives canvassing the building again, and I just spent the last 2 hours going over the security videotapes. And found nothing, I gather." "Nada. I have a hunch the tapes don't show anything because he monkeyed with the cameras, but I'm no expert." "Then we need to send them to someone who is." "That's my thinking." Jennifer said, "The security company will raise hell, most likely. They swear their cameras haven't been altered in any way, that it would have been impossible for any unauthorized person to do that. Of course, they also can't explain how Tara Jameson vanished from her supposedly secure building. The egg on their faces isn't pretty." "Has Andy made an official request for the cameras?" John asked. She nodded. "He's doing that as we speak, and we have technicians standing by to take the things apart as soon as we get our hands on them." "So we wait," Quentin said with a sigh. "I hate waiting." He stared at the bulletin board. "Kendra, any luck from the databases on that 1894 date?" She shook her head without a glance at the humming laptop before her. "Not so far. Hardly surprising, considering we're going back more than 100 years. Most records that old haven't been digitized yet." "If it comes to that," Jennifer said, "we aren't even sure the 1894 date is part of this. Even if it was on the note, it doesn't have to mean anything. Maybe our mysterious tipster just wants to make us waste time looking." Quentin looked at her for a long moment, then said, matter-of-factly, "You wrote the note, Jen." She stared at him. "What? No, I didn't." "Look in your notebook." His voice remained steady, even gentle. "You'll find a page torn out. The page you found in your car will match it." At first, it seemed she wouldn't do it, but finally she opened her small black notebook on the table and slowly flipped through the pages covered by her neat shorthand notes. They all saw her pause, and they all saw her rub her finger gently across the ragged remains of a torn-out page. By the time Maggie left Ellen Randall's house, just after noon, she felt drained. She drove only as far as the nearest recreation park and stopped there, carefully parking her car in an open area where she could see anyone approach her, and warily leaving the engine running even as she double-checked to make certain all the doors were locked. For several minutes she sat there studying her surroundings, senses probing. Nothing. The place was virtually deserted on this dreary weekday. Still, Maggie couldn't quite relax and kept glancing up from time to time even as she opened her sketchbook and looked at the still incomplete sketch of the rapist-killer. Ellen hadn't been able to add anything to what Maggie already knew, and her continuing pain and anguish were still so intense it was difficult for Maggie to feel anything else right now, but she tried to concentrate. Longish hair, roughly oval face, maybe. Difficult to be sure, since he always seemed to wear a plastic mask of some kind. Eyes? Who knew what shape or color? Who knew if his nose was straight, or his mouth thin-lipped or full? Who knew if his ears were set high or low? None of the women had seen him, not so much as a glance. They had only felt what he did to them, felt his body against theirs, felt his hands touching them. His hands. Hardly aware of what she was doing, Maggie turned to a fresh page and began slowly, tentatively drawing. Her eyes were half closed, remembered voices soft in her mind, while remembered suffering made her ache. Felt his hands holding my wrists. He pushed my chin up as if he wanted to look at my throat, and then he touched it. He was holding my legs apart. Strong, so strong. The grip of his fingers was so strong. His nails bit into my skin, even through the gloves I know he was wearing, dug into my very bones. He cupped my cheek with his obscene gentleness, and then I felt his teeth. He was squeezing my breasts, and I could hear him breathing, panting. His nails dug into me. He slapped me, and I felt... The ring he wore tore her flesh, laid it open along her jawline. She could feel the warm wetness of her own blood trickling down over her throat, feel him hanging over her like some monstrous creature out of her nightmares. Part of her was glad he'd wrapped the nightgown around her head in a blindfold, because she was terrified to see his face, to see the animal he'd become. But she was even more terrified of what he was going to do to her now that he had her helpless. She felt his hands roughly tying her wrist to the bedpost, just as he'd tied the other one, and a low moan of protest and anguish throbbed in her bruised throat. "Bobby, don't, please. Bobby, I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" Maggie came out of it with a start, hearing an odd little whimper that at first she didn't even recognize as coming from her own throat. With shaking hands she wiped at the tears on her face, looking around her to make certain there was no one near, as well as to ground herself once more in the here and now. A peaceful scene. The park mostly deserted on this Wednesday afternoon in November, a bit damp and chilly, but unthreatening. Quiet. Safe? Probably not. But for the moment she was safe, surely. For the moment. But it was nevertheless several long and unsettling minutes before the overwhelming terror and strange sense of guilt finally left her, before her breathing steadied and the hot pressure of tears eased, before she could nerve herself to look down at what she'd drawn. Hands. A man's hands reaching out for something or someone, raw-boned in their brutal strength, awful in their sick, grasping hunger, large, sinewy, ugly, with sparse black hairs sprinkled across the backs and even onto the fingers, nails that were surprisingly long but ragged because he bit them. Because he bit them. The fleeting memory, wispy as smoke, drifted away, and Maggie was left staring down at the hands she'd drawn. So unique, she knew she'd recognize them instantly if she saw them in the flesh, but otherwise there was nothing to identify them, except the rings. On the right hand was a big gold ring, inset with some kind of stone. On the left hand was a wedding band. Maggie stared down at the sketch for a long time, her gaze locked on the hands that had tortured and maimed and murdered so many women. "Bobby," she whispered. Chapter 16. "But how could I have written it without knowing I had?" Jennifer protested. "I swear to you, I don't remember anything except finding the note in my car." "Of course you don't remember," Quentin said soothingly. "I'm not saying you did it consciously, Jen." She scowled at him. "How else could I have done it?" "It's called automatic writing. It's a way to free the unconscious mind, to tap into your own memories or abilities." "You're saying I remembered those dates?" "No. In your case, I'm saying it was a latent ability you tapped into." He traded glances with Kendra. "We're not entirely sure where it comes from, but automatic writing sometimes shows up during stressful situations, especially in cases of extreme need. You tend to be intuitive, don't you? Yeah, sometimes. That's usually the case. Someone with good intuition can often tap into unsuspected, latent abilities. Are you saying I'm a psychic? No. I'm saying that with the right trigger, sometime during the early years of your life, you might have been. There's a theory that most humans have some sort of extrasensory ability if we only know how to tap into it, maybe left over from more primitive times, when we needed an edge just to survive one day to the next. I've heard that, Jennifer admitted. Quentin nodded. In this case, you badly wanted an answer, or at least something to point you in the right direction, so your subconscious tried to help, opening itself up, sort of like an antenna. Thoughts are just energy, after all, the electrical impulses of the brain. She was still frowning. My mind picked up somebody else's thoughts. Caught the gist of them, let's say. He frowned as he thought of those 2 dates. The bare gist. And those thoughts just happened to come from the rapist? There are few coincidences in life, I've found. You're looking for him, and have been for months. He's embedded in your consciousness. Science is only beginning to understand the way our brains work, but suppose the electrical energy of our individual minds has a signature as distinctive as a fingerprint. That's entirely possible. And maybe there's a part of our brains that can recognize those signatures, even if we can't do it consciously. So my subconscious sort of tracked his? Maybe. It's certainly a possibility. In any case, we found that the source automatic writing taps into tends to be surprisingly both specific and accurate. She eyed him. Has anybody ever told you that you're a very weird FBI agent? Frequently. I'm not surprised. John said, but he is making sense. At least, I think he is. And none of us has been able to come up with any other explanation for how that note got into your car. Jennifer sighed. Great. That's just great. Now I not only talk to myself, but my subconscious mind is listening in on other minds. Only under extreme stress, Quentin reminded her gravely. She got up. I'm leaving now. I'm going out on the streets to talk, out loud, to some of the uniforms who patrol the area where Hollis Templeton was found. Still looking for your transient? I'm going to find him, damn it, with absolutely no help from my subconscious. Kendra asked, Mind if I come along? I don't know if I'll be any help, since this is your territory rather than mine, but God knows I could use the fresh air and exercise. If I stare at this laptop much longer, I'll either go to sleep or go nuts. Jennifer barely hesitated. Sure, I'd welcome the company. Don't get into trouble, Quentin told his partner. Without you along, she responded politely, how on earth would I? Ouch, John murmured. She's mean when she loses sleep, Quentin told him. Kendra wiggled her finger gently at her partner and followed a grinning Jennifer from the room. Quentin sighed. I don't think Jennifer quite bought the automatic writing explanation. Sometimes I forget how hard this sort of thing is for most people to accept. But you do believe that's where the note came from? Oh, yeah. Then am I wrong in thinking the chances are the rapist was somewhere close by when Jennifer tuned in on him? You caught that, huh? Quentin smiled. Yeah, probably. Distance is usually a factor, so it's likely he was nearby. That's why Kendra's tagging along with Jen. We don't figure this is the sort of guy who hangs around police stations because cops fascinate him. If he was here, it was because he was watching someone. Jennifer? Maybe. he might well consider grabbing a cop to be the ultimate challenge. But it could have been any woman entering or leaving this building. Of course. Or any woman in the general area, for that matter. There's no way to know for sure. Figures. John looked at his watch again and said restlessly, I know there hasn't been a lot of time and virtually no new information, but are you two profilers getting a handle on the way this animal's mind works? Quentin tapped a finger on the legal pad in front of him, where his neat printing filled most of the top page. Maybe. And the bastard likes his work. A lot. Yeah, I got that. Answer me this. Why have victims of his attacks survived, when those in 1934 didn't? I mean, if he's copying the crimes. Good question. I guess he expected them to die. He took care always to leave them in out-of-the-way locations where they were more than likely to remain undiscovered, certainly long enough to bleed to death or die of exposure, especially this time of year. The fact is, those women fought to stay alive, maybe harder than he expected, and after 3 straight victims survived, he made damn sure Samantha Mitchell wouldn't, by cutting her throat. If he expected them to die, why bother to blind them? To keep them from seeing. Maybe his face, or maybe something else. He didn't want them watching him, didn't want them to see what he did to them. Maybe didn't want them to know he enjoyed it. John's mouth twisted. Christ. Yeah, not a nice boy. Massive understatement. John was silent for a long time, his gaze moving over the photos and sketches on the bulletin boards. Then, slowly, he said, Quentin, do you believe in fate? Yep. That was quick. Quentin chuckled. John, when you do the sort of work I do, you get most of your own philosophies and beliefs figured out early on. You bet I believe in fate. I also believe in reincarnation, and the two are definitely connected. Is there a karmic pattern to our lives? You'd better believe it. What about free will? Oh, there's that, too. I never understood why people think they're mutually exclusive. Ask me, our entire lives aren't planned out for us. Just some things. Specific events along the way. Crossroads we're meant to come to. Tests, maybe, to measure our progress. But we always have choices, and those choices can send us along an unplanned path. And change our fates? I believe so. Still, if you listen to Bishop and Miranda, and I certainly do, though don't tell them I admitted that, there are some things that are meant to happen at a certain moment and in a certain way, no matter which path you choose, which decisions you make along your own particular journey. Those pivotal moments appear to be set in stone. Maybe they represent the specific lessons we're meant to learn. Set in stone. Things we have to face, things we have to learn, responsibilities we have to fulfill, and mistakes we have to correct. John continued to stare broodingly at the bulletin board. Quentin watched his friend for a moment, then said quietly, So that's it. That's why Maggie does what she does. Atonement? She says she's responsible for the continued existence of this bastard, because she didn't stop him once before, as she was meant to. I see. No copycat at all. Just the same twisted, evil soul reborn to do his thing one more time. John looked at him. You don't seem surprised. This isn't the first time we've encountered something along these lines. A reincarnated killer? That's right. Quentin's smile was a bit wry. Reincarnated? Resurrected? Or just plain dead and still kicking? An amazingly resilient thing, evil. You're saying Maggie really is responsible for this? I'm saying the universe might be holding her accountable for it, or for some part of it. Maybe that's why she was put in this particular place at this particular time, and given the abilities she was born with. To suffer? To pay in agony for a mistake she might have made a long time ago? John was dimly surprised by the harsh sound of his own voice. We all pay for our mistakes, John, in this life or the next. But if you believe that, you also have to believe we're rewarded when we get it right. Yeah, Maggie's suffering in this life. She's also helping other people, easing their suffering. Whether she's here to correct a mistake or just living another stage in her own spiritual development, I'd say Maggie is earning major bonus points this time around. John had to smile, albeit reluctantly. So she'll be rewarded in the next life? Hey, maybe she'll be rewarded later on in this one. If she corrects her past mistake? Quentin shrugged. Maybe. Then again, Maggie might already have balanced her books with the universe, John, despite the sense of responsibility she still feels. We have no way of knowing what's expected of us. Not even Sears? Not even Sears. After a moment, John said, That really sucks. Tell me about it. Long after Maggie left, Hollis sat as she usually did, her face turned toward the window. She wondered idly if, after tomorrow, she'd still be able to hear as acutely as she did now. She could hear the cop out in the hall shift in the chair where he sat. She could hear the elevators at the end of the hall as the cars passed this floor on their journeys up and down. She could hear the murmur of somebody's television. Outside and several floors down, she could hear the busy swish of traffic. Would she be able to hear so well if, tomorrow, she could see again? Probably not. But that wasn't what bothered her. She would happily trade the sharper hearing for the return of her sight. But would she, alone of all the victims so far, survive his attack still able to see? And if so, why? If Maggie was right about fate and destiny, there had to be a reason. What had she done to earn that? Or what was she supposed to do? Quietly, she murmured, Annie, are you there? I'm here. The voice was faint, hardly louder than a whisper, but at least it was a reply after many hours of silence. There's a lot you haven't told me, isn't there? Yes. Why? Don't you trust me? I had to be so careful, especially at first. Other times those I tried to warn could never accept me. I frightened them. I didn't want to frighten you. I'm not frightened. I know. Now. Then tell me what I can do to help Maggie. She helped me more than she knows. She took away so much of the pain and fear, and she's fighting for all of us. I have to help her. Tell me how, Annie. At first, she didn't think there'd be any sort of answer, but finally, even more distantly and fading into silence, the answer came. Soon. Soon, Hollis. When John finally reached Maggie on her cell phone, he had to force himself to speak calmly. Where are you? I'm leaving the hospital after checking on Hollis. She sounded as calm as always, though John fancied he could detect a note of strain. I just turned the phone back on. Then you're on your way back here? I was, but there's one more thing I think I should go ahead and do today.
What?
A walk-through of the building where they found Samantha Mitchell. Maybe I can get something useful. Can you give me the address?
Immediately, John said, "You don't need to do that alone, Maggie. I'll meet you there."
She barely hesitated. Okay, fine. What's the address? He found the Mitchell file on the cluttered conference table and read off the address to her, finishing with, "If you get there first, wait outside for me, all right?" I will. See you there.
John closed his cell phone and said to Quentin, "She shouldn't do it alone."
Did I say anything?
You wanted to.
Quentin smiled slightly, but said very quietly, "She has to do this her way, just like I warned you days ago. But you already knew that, didn't you, John?"
Let's just say I figured it out. I've gotten to know Maggie, to understand what makes her tick, or at least I think I have. You said all along that her motivation for feeling the pain of all those victims had to be deep, powerful, maybe even set in stone. Atonement, whatever the judgment of the universe. In Maggie's mind, there's only one way to truly correct the mistake she believes she made. Stop this bastard, here and now. And she means to do everything in her power to make sure that happens, no matter what the cost to herself.
I'd say so. I'd also say you won't do her any favors by trying to protect her, and you won't stop her from doing what she feels she has to do.
Are you sure about that? Can you be?
Are you asking me if I know what the future will bring? Visibly bracing himself, John replied,
I guess that is what I'm asking you. Can I protect her?
No.
After a long moment, John drew a breath and said lightly, You won't mind if I try?
I wouldn't expect anything else.
John nodded, then turned without another word and left. Alone again in the conference room, Quentin murmured into the silence,
Fate doesn't expect anything else of you either, John. I wonder when you'll realize that. When Andy came into the conference room a few minutes later, he found Quentin slumped in his chair, feet propped on a closed file on the conference table, and fingers laced together across his middle. He was frowning. Andy didn't know the agent well, but he knew preoccupation when he saw it.
Worried about John?
He looked at Andy and blinked.
I asked if you were worried about John. I saw him leave a little while ago, and he looked a bit upset.
Absently, Quentin said, Yeah, he isn't hiding his feelings too well right now, is he?
He's going after Maggie?
Yeah. Patient, Andy said.
And you're worried?
Quentin blinked again, then shook his head. No, not about that. No sense worrying about something set in stone a long time ago. Andy started to ask what he meant by that, then decided he really didn't want to know.
Then what?
Did you ever get the nagging feeling there was something you'd overlooked?
Occasionally.
And?
And I usually find I've overlooked something.
Yeah, me too. Quentin stared at the cluttered table. Somewhere among all this stuff is a detail I should have paid closer attention to.
Can't narrow it down any more than that?
No, damn it. He took his feet off the table and sat up, opening the closed file rather grimly. But I intend to, because it's bugging the hell out of me. Andy shrugged philosophically.
Let me know when you find it.
When he reached the abandoned and deserted building where Samantha Mitchell's body had been found, John wasn't surprised to find the entire area all but deserted. It wasn't an especially inviting day, cold, cloudy, and dreary, and misting rain from time to time. And the neighborhood wasn't what anyone would have called appealing. Far from it. What few buildings within view hadn't already been condemned or scheduled for demolition wore the barred window, iron-grated door look of desperate fortresses holding danger at bay. Maggie's car was parked in front of the building where Samantha had been found, and she got out as he parked his car, waiting for him on the sidewalk. "This isn't what I'd call a cheerful place," he noted as he joined her. "Hardly," Maggie agreed. She was hugging the sketch pad to her breast, as she often did, as though it were a shield. The chill breeze made the tip of her nose pink and stirred her long hair so that it seemed to have an independent life all its own. It's almost as if he chooses the places where he leaves his victims partly for their desolation, as if he wants the women to feel abandoned, alone. Maybe he does. Maybe it's all part of his twisted game to isolate his victims in every sense of the word. She shivered visibly. "Yeah. Maggie, maybe you should wait to do this. We need all the information we can get. You know that." "Yeah, but it's hardly fair, even of a demanding universe, to expect you to keep putting yourself through this. Didn't anybody ever teach you that life isn't especially fair?" He looked at her for a moment, then said lightly, "I'm learning that all the time." Suddenly, a bit self-conscious, Maggie went to put the sketch pad inside her car. "No reason to take this in with me," she said. "I never can sketch anything while I'm walking through anyway." When she rejoined him, John touched her arm. "Are you sure you're up to this? After our all-nighter at the station, you can't have gotten much rest." "I doubt anybody got much rest. Did you?" "No, but I'm not an empath carrying around the weight of other people's pain." Maggie smiled suddenly. "Can you imagine yourself even saying that a week ago?" He had to laugh, however briefly. "No. In fact, hell no. We live and learn." She started up the uneven walkway to the front doorway of the building. John followed. "And you didn't answer me. Should you be doing this today?" "We don't have a lot of time left." He caught her arm just short of the front steps and stopped her. "Something you feel, or something you know?" "Both." She met his intent gaze as steadily as she could. Tara Jameson could already be dead, but even if she isn't, she's suffering right now. "That isn't your fault, Maggie." She didn't try to argue with him. "If I don't do everything within my power to try to find her, to stop him, I'll blame myself for the rest of my life. Do you understand that?" He hesitated. Then, with an oddly tentative movement, as if he couldn't really help himself, he reached up and brushed back a strand of her hair that had blown across her cheek, his fingers lingering only a moment against her skin. "If I don't understand anything else, I do understand that," he said. "But there's something you have to understand, Maggie. I lost my sister to this bastard. Andy and his detectives have lived with the investigation for months. Quentin and Kendra put their lives on the line every day trying to put monsters of every kind in cages where they belong. Maybe we don't feel the pain of the victims as intensely as you do, but we feel it." Maggie drew a deep breath and let it out slowly. "You're right. I'm sorry. I'm just not used to being a team player." "Don't tell me you're used to it." He smiled. "Usually a team leader, so this isn't so easy for me either. But as long as I can feel I'm contributing, I can handle not being the one in charge." Dryly, Maggie said, "I have a feeling you've been in charge since you got here, one way or another." "Don't tell Andy that. Or Quentin, for that matter." "If you think they don't know, you're wrong." Realizing he was still holding her arm,
John forced himself to let go of her. "Then they've been very gracious about it. So, we're going in there, huh?"
"I don't know if it'll help. Maybe he spent as little time here as he did all the other places he left his victims. Maybe I won't find anything new. But I have to try."
"Okay. Hang on a minute. It's so overcast out here, we're bound to need flashlights inside."
Maggie waited while he returned to his car for a couple of flashlights, and then they entered the building. The flashlights helped them to see a place very like the one where Hollis Templeton had been left, a dirty, ramshackle building that had long ago been stripped to its bare bones. The floor creaked underfoot, and they could both hear the whispering scurry of rats.
"Yuck," Maggie said.
"I hate rats."
"I'm not crazy about them either, and there's no blood trail to follow this time. According to the report, she was found down that hallway, a room at the rear, on the left side of the building."
John kept his voice matter-of-fact. Maggie stood there for a moment, collecting herself, slowly opening the door to those inner senses. Almost immediately she could smell the blood, and it was no easier to bear than before, thick and cloying in her nostrils. But this time she forced herself to push past that, to let her senses probe beyond the sickly sweet odor.
"Maggie?"
"I'm okay. It feels different somehow."
"In what way?"
"I'm not sure."
She began moving slowly down the long hallway toward the back of the building, where there were half a dozen rooms, their doors long gone and broken casings leaning drunkenly like a child's drawing of doorways. "Creepy place, even with only 5 senses," John muttered.
Maggie wanted to tell him it was infinitely creepier with extra senses, but her attention was tunneling, fixing on the particular slanted doorway to the left that was drawing her toward it. The blood smell was growing stronger, and with it came flashes of darkness, much as she had sensed where Hollis had been left. Flashes of darkness, and pain, and terror, and... Why was it getting harder to breathe? Why did she feel an odd sensation, as if some great weight or presence hung over her, bent toward her? She didn't even hear John's cell phone begin to ring. Chapter 17. Scott joined Quentin in the conference room, tired and dusty but triumphant, to add to the bulletin board 2 more photos of victims killed in 1934.
"Dug these out of a file box over at the North Station," he reported. "Victims number 3 and 7 in that year."
Quentin stopped frowning over files on the conference table long enough to study the photos. "Resembling Samantha Mitchell and Tara Jameson, respectively. Yeah, that's 6 victims so far, and they match up with our 6. Call me crazy, but I'd say that was fairly conclusive evidence that our guy is a copycat." Andy, who had come in virtually on Scott's heels, nodded.
"I'd say so."
Quentin said, "We're reasonably certain there were 8 victims that year, right?" Scott nodded. "According to that book Jen found, yeah, but so far there's no sign of the police files for the remaining 2 victims. I've got 2 more possibles to check, including a hell of a big box of old miscellaneous files that somehow ended up at City Hall."
"Our tax dollars at work," Andy muttered. "Well, we don't know that finding photos of the last 2 victims will help us, but we don't know that it won't either. Keep at it, Scott."
"You bet." Energy renewed by success, Scott hurried back out of the conference room. Andy sat down at the table and rubbed his face with both hands. "I'm barely 10 years older than he is, and it feels more like 20. Jeez, what happens to stamina after 35? "It's still there," Quentin told him. "It just has to be tended a bit more carefully. I like catnaps, myself."
Andy eyed him. "How many of those do you have a day?" "I'll get one later." Quentin frowned at the cluttered table. "I'm still in search of whatever it is that's bugging me." "Still no idea what it is?" "Not yet, but I know it's here somewhere." He reached for another file. Something a friend or family member of a victim said in an interview. Something in an autopsy report or crime scene photo. I just don't know. Before Andy could respond, Quentin's cell phone rang, and as the agent answered, Andy could hear the excited, booming voice distinctly even across the table. It sounded like a big bear in a very small cave. "Quentin? Hey, Quentin!" "I hear you, Joey." Wincing, Quentin put a prudent few inches between the phone and his ear. "What's up?" "Listen, Quentin, I got to thinking maybe I could help you find that rapist you cops are after, so I've been asking around, and I think maybe I got a lead." "Joey?" "Guy I know swears he's seen an old black caddy, like my dad used to drive, parked weeks ago near where they found one of the ladies after he got done with her, and he thinks he's seen it more than once since then. In the neighborhood, you know, around, especially at night." Quentin untangled that as best he could. "All right, Joey, but listen, don't—" "The guy I know. He thinks he's seen the car again just the other night, you know, where the poor Mitchell lady was found. So maybe it's the bastard we're looking for. I'm gonna check it out, Quentin. See if I maybe can find that caddy for you." "Joey, I'll let you know soon as I find something, Quentin. And I'll be careful, I promise." "Joey? Joey?" Slowly, Quentin turned the phone off. "Shit," he muttered. Andy said, "I gather that was the source who gave us Samantha Mitchell's fake kidnapper?" "Yeah." "You think he might be onto something?" Quentin rose and went to a large city map on one wall, where several small red flags marked the locations where victims had been found. "Weeks ago," he said. "Probably around the time Hollis Templeton was found. And if the car was seen again the other night near where Samantha Mitchell was found—" He indicated the two flags closest together. "Not more than 3 miles apart. Definitely what Joey would consider in the neighborhood. Yeah, he might be onto something." Andy rose. "Then I say we check DMV records for a black caddy. What model, do you think? Old. Covers a lot of territory." Quentin came back to the conference table, still frowning. "Joey's dad was killed 25 years ago. As I recall, he drove a 1972 caddy. To be on the safe side, I'd cover 1970 to at least 76. "Right." Andy grimaced slightly. "There can't be too many 30-year-old black caddies still on the road, surely. At least not in Seattle." "Let's hope not." On the point of turning away, Andy said, "You look worried again." "Yeah. Let's just say that Joey has all the subtlety and caution of the proverbial bull in a china shop. So if he finds that caddy, he's apt to find a hell of a lot more than he can handle." Quentin finished grimly. "Then we'd better find it first." Andy left the room. Quentin was left alone with his thoughts, and none of them was pleasant. He had no idea where Joey had been calling from, and knew he had little chance of finding him before Joey quite possibly found trouble. Bad trouble. As much as Quentin wanted to find and catch the rapist, he really hoped Joey's lead at the very least failed to lead Joey in the right direction. All Quentin's training and experience told him that Joey's simple cunning and brute strength would be no match for the evil he was trying to find. Bad as he was, Joey wasn't nearly bad enough to successfully fight something he could never understand. Unless he was very, very lucky, he would lose that fight. Problem was, Joey had never been lucky. And there were too many deaths on Quentin's conscience as it was. "Shit," he said again, softly this time. He sent a restless glance toward his phone, wishing Joey would call again, but certain he wouldn't. Not because of any premonition, but because he knew Joey was hell-bent to find the rapist, and so do something to help Quentin and repay an old debt. A debt Quentin hadn't hesitated to use in the ensuing years to keep Joey in line and out of trouble. He was really beginning to wish he hadn't done that. Trying not to worry about what he couldn't change, Quentin drew another file toward him and tried once again to figure out what was bugging him. But before he could get too deep into that, Andy returned to the room. "The ME's report on Samantha Mitchell," he told Quentin, not without satisfaction. "A few hours earlier than expected." "Anything we didn't know?" Quentin asked, accepting the folder and opening it. "Nah, not really. At least, not that I can see." Quentin began reading the report and almost immediately stiffened. "Shit." Alarmed by the tone, Andy said, "What?" "She died there? Samantha Mitchell died where her body was found?" "Yeah, but we knew that." Quentin grabbed his cell phone and began punching in a number, saying grimly, "Not all of us knew it." John couldn't have said why he felt uneasy. Maybe it was simply because he still had trouble even imagining what Maggie was doing, what it was like to literally feel the sensations and emotions experienced by another person days and even weeks before, simply by walking through a place where they had occurred. Maybe it was this dark, chilled, and definitely eerie building. Or maybe it was just his own increasing sensitivity to emotions. His. And hers. "Creepy place, even with only 5 senses," he offered, more to maintain contact with Maggie than anything else. He saw her turn her head toward him for a brief instant, but then she was gazing toward that dark doorway at the end of the hall, moving toward it. John had the strongest impulse to stop her, to get his hands on her so that he could what? His cell phone rang, and he jumped as the strident sound broke the silence. Maggie didn't even seem to hear it, still walking toward the room, going through the doorway. He followed, though he was still behind her as he dug his phone out and opened it. And he heard even before he could get the phone to his ear. "John, get out of there." Quentin's voice was sharp, imperative. "What? What are you—" "Listen to me. Get out of there. Get Maggie out. Now. She died there, John. Samantha Mitchell died there, in that room, and if Maggie gets too close—" John heard a thud, saw Maggie's flashlight hit the floor, and quickly pointed his own at her. He was still behind her, and at first saw only the cloud of her hair, long and a little wild, but then she turned slowly, making an odd choking sound. Her hands were at her throat, the face above them very pale, and her mouth was open as though she wanted to say something to him. For an eternal instant, John was frozen, just staring at her. Then she took her hands from her throat, looking at them as though they belonged to someone else. Her hands were covered with blood. So was her throat. Jennifer rejoined Kendra beside the car and shrugged warily. "There are an awful lot of transients in this area, so I guess I can't blame the uniforms for not noticing one in particular. Damn it." "We can check the shelters again." "I know, but they won't start filling up until tonight." Kendra nodded. "And I noticed that a few likely people to question sort of melted away when we got here." "Yeah, the uniforms say everybody's jumpy as hell around here. And, of course, some of the transients figure if we can't find the actual rapist, we'll make do with one of them." She sighed. "Really can't blame them for the distrust, but it doesn't make the job any easier." "No." Slowly, Kendra added, "Didn't your patrolman friend say Robeson was picked up for creating a disturbance?" "Yeah. According to the arrest report, he was accosting people coming out of that liquor store just down the block. babbling something about how the ghost of his old enemy was coming after him, and he kept looking toward the building over there where Hollis Templeton was found. Jennifer shook her head, suddenly uncomfortable under the other woman's steady, clear-eyed gaze. At the very least, this is turning into a real wild goose chase. I don't know why I thought it could be a legitimate lead. Just a drunk rambling, probably. There must have been something that drew your attention, something that alerted your instincts. Jennifer fumbled for a toothpick and made herself say, "Maybe it was just desperation. Maybe I'm imagining leads where none exist." Kendra smiled faintly. "I doubt that. You're too good a cop to imagine something like that. You trust the friend who gave you the tip, right? That was why you followed up on it initially." "Yeah. But there was something else, wasn't there? Maybe something you read in the arrest report?" Jennifer almost denied it, but then she recalled details of the report one by one. She realized what had caught her attention, and felt the rush of adrenaline she always felt when a puzzle piece fell into place. Yeah, there was something. Most of his ramblings didn't make sense. He's more schizophrenic than bipolar, if you ask me. But Robeson did say something that struck me. What? He said the ghost of his old enemy was carrying a sack over one shoulder, a sack with puppies in it. Robeson was certain the ghost was going to drown the puppies, then come back for him. Kendra nodded slowly. There was something alive in the sack. That's what he saw. Something moving. Yeah, that plus the fact that this ghost of his was carrying anything at all seemed to me just a bit too detailed to be completely delusional. Turning to study the building in the distance where Hollis had been found, Kendra said, "I'd guess at least a few transients use that half-demolished warehouse there on the corner for shelter when the weather's bad. It was cold when Hollis was found, wasn't it?" "Yeah, very." "Am I wrong, or can the rear of that building be seen from at least one side of the warehouse?" "Let's go find out." 10 minutes later, the two women stood gingerly on a rusted old catwalk still connected to a single interior wall of what remained of the warehouse. There wasn't much inside the building, but what was there was clear evidence that at least a few people had been using the place as shelter recently. There was some old furniture, a mildewed sofa and ragged chair, grouped in one corner with a threadbare tarp providing a third wall to help keep out at least the worst of the wind, and a fire had been kindled in an old trash barrel in the center of the area, obviously for warmth. With the toe of one shoe, Jennifer nudged a pile of newspapers and old rags that had clearly been used as a bed up on the catwalk. Scary place to sleep, I'd think. But maybe safer than down there, Kendra pointed out, gesturing toward the concrete floor below. At least from the viewpoint of a paranoid schizophrenic. The way this thing creaks, it would certainly provide a warning if company came. Yeah, and maybe he slept underneath the window for the same reason, because he was paranoid and wanted to keep an eye on things. Jennifer looked at the window just above the makeshift bed. It was the only one that still had opaque, frosted glass in most of its panes, but 2 of the panes were missing. And through the openings she had a dandy view of the rear of the building where Hollis had been found. And take a look. You were right. Kendra leaned in to glance out the window. Far as I can tell, this is probably the only vantage point in the area where that entrance would be clearly visible. Isn't that a street light just off the corner there? Yeah. So even on a dark night, Robeson, if it was him up here, could have seen someone go into the building and could have been able to tell he was carrying something wrapped in a tarp or in a sack, something that moved. A ghost. Maybe masked, eerie in the light, or maybe even someone he really did recognize from his own past. Kendra looked at Jennifer with a faint smile. If you ask me, This is no wild goose chase we're on. I say we keep looking for David Robeson." Conscious of the familiar adrenaline rush, Jennifer nodded. "I agree." It was only a few minutes later, as they got into the car, that she added, "How did you know there was something in the report that could have been important, anyway? You never saw the report, did you?" "No." "Well, then?" Kendra smiled. "Call it a hunch." "Christ, John, I'm sorry," Quentin said into the phone. "Since this bastard always just dumped the women and left, doing his torture and maiming elsewhere, I assumed he'd done the same thing to Samantha Mitchell. That he'd cut her throat and abdomen before he carried her to that building, and then just arranged her body for maximum shock effect. If I'd paid closer attention to the crime scene photos, I would have seen it. That mattress was soaked with blood, especially around her head and shoulders. I should have realized that he must have killed her there, in that room." "It isn't your fault, Quentin," John sighed. "We were all a bit distracted trying to deal with the less physical details of all this." "No excuse. Not for me. How's Maggie?" "If you want the truth, she's doing better than I am. The bleeding stopped as soon as I got her out of the building, and by the time I got her in the car and wiped some of the blood away, there was just an angry-looking red line, where before it was open." "Where is she now?" "Sleeping. The moment the shock wore off, it seemed all she wanted to do was sleep, so I brought her back here to her place and put her to bed." "Then I'm sure she'll be okay. She wasn't in there long enough to connect completely with what happened to Samantha Mitchell." "And if she had been? Are you telling me it could have killed her?" Quentin hesitated, then said, "It's possible, at least in this instance. I don't think she's quite there yet, but if her sensitivity continues to increase, I believe she might eventually become an absolute empath." "Absolute?" "Yeah. Her system, both physically and emotionally, would become so sensitive it would literally absorb the injuries or illnesses of someone else. If you cut your hand and she touched you, the cut would heal on you and appear on her. A real bleeding cut, pain and all, identical to the one you had." "Jesus." "Yeah. What I'm not so sure about is whether she's a healing empath or a sharing empath. If she's healing, any injury she absorbed, at least short of a mortal one, she would also be able to heal. So your cut would vanish, and the one on her would disappear as soon as she was able to heal it, probably within minutes." "That can't be possible," John protested. "To heal someone else's physical injuries with a touch?" "Oh, that part of it's definitely possible. Believe me. I know of a healer so gifted she literally brought a man back from the dead after he was shot. With her, though, it's a distinct ability, not empathic, but simply healing. It takes a great deal of her own energy, her own life force, to heal, but she doesn't absorb the actual wounds of whoever she's trying to help." "But Maggie would, if she's a healing empath." "That would be my guess." "And if she's a sharing empath, she wouldn't heal? She'd just absorb the injuries, the pain, and suffer with them?" Quentin hesitated again. "I don't know for sure, John. We've never encountered an absolute empath, just theorized about one. But considering the slash on Maggie's throat healed as quickly as it did, I'd say she'll probably be a healing empath. The only real question is whether it'll be an automatic ability, triggered simply by touch, or one she'll have to concentrate to use. We'll hope for the latter, so she'll have some control." John drew a breath. "Now tell me how she absorbed a slashed throat from an empty room, will you?" Samantha Mitchell died in that room. Recently and horribly. Suffering a hell of a lot of pain and anguish, to say nothing of terror. Those emotions, that energy, lingered there in the room. Maggie was able to connect to that, to actually begin to experience some of what that dying woman went through. With a sigh, Quentin added, "Whether she evolves into an absolute empath or not, I think Maggie's system is especially sensitive to these particular deaths because she's connected to them, linked to them in a very basic way. Fate. Destiny. Yeah. Whether these victims are all souls Maggie's known before, or it's his slimy soul she's connected to, is impossible for me to say. Maybe she knows." Sitting in Maggie's quiet living room, gazing at the painting above the fireplace, John said, "Maybe I'll ask her. But I'm hoping she'll sleep for hours yet. Look, I don't think she should be alone, so I'm going to stay here. If anything happens, anything changes, or you guys come up with something we need to know, call me, okay?" "I will." "Considering the worsening weather, I'm expecting Kendra and Jennifer back any time now, and Scott as well. If nothing else, we'll at least have the DMV list of black caddies to go over. Something's about to break, I know that much. I have an itchy feeling on the back of my neck, and that usually means we're close to the end of things." "One way or another?" "Yeah, one way or another." After they'd said goodbye and hung up, John wandered over to the fireplace and gazed up at the painting. The signature on the lower corner was a scrawl, but he could read it. Rafferty. Beau Rafferty. Her brother's work. I wonder the style of the painting had been familiar to him. He owned 2 Raffertys himself. Young as he still was, the man was considered one of the most talented artists this country had produced in the last 100 years, almost single-handedly bringing Impressionist-style painting to the forefront of 20th and 21st century art. One artist who painted masterpieces for the world to enjoy, and another who talked gently to traumatized victims of crime and then sketched uncannily accurate images of criminals so the police could bring them to justice. 2 talented artists who shared a mother and who both possessed other very unique abilities. It really made him wonder about their mother. A powerful psychic as well as a gifted artist? Or were psychic abilities in any way hereditary? Deciding that he was doing the inner equivalent of whistling in the dark because he was feeling unsettled, John glanced out at the increasingly gray, dreary afternoon and set about making himself comfortable. He turned on the gas logs in the fireplace, and when the cheery fire was crackling, also turned on the television, low, to a news program, more for company and background life than any desire for news. He'd had enough news for a while. He made coffee, having little trouble with Maggie's old-fashioned percolator, then explored her freezer and found a large package of what looked like homemade soup. It seemed an ideal meal to prepare and allow to simmer until Maggie woke up. So he did that. While the soup was heating, he checked all the doors and windows a second time, making certain everything was locked and secure. He wasn't normally so security-conscious, but what had happened to Maggie had shaken him more than he wanted to admit even to himself, and he intended to be as careful as possible. Maybe he couldn't protect her from psychic vibes that could cause her pain and injury, but he could damn well make certain nothing more tangible could hurt her. Such as a serial rapist who might have been watching the police station, and so might have seen Maggie as easily as he could have seen Jennifer or Kendra. A rapist and murderer who could well decide to eliminate the threat of a sketch artist who, given enough time, might well be able to see him as his victims never had. Restless, John went to Maggie's bedroom door and eased it open. The room was quiet and still. The lamp on her nightstand was turned low and showed him that she was still sleeping, apparently peacefully. He stood in the doorway for several minutes, just watching her, listening to her breathe. He had removed only her jacket and shoes and covered her with a blanket when he had carried her in here. She had been too drowsy to protest and terrifyingly slight and defenseless in his arms. As far as he could tell, she hadn't moved so much as an inch since he had left her here. He stepped into the room and picked up her flannel jacket where it lay across the padded bench at the foot of the bed. He could see the blood stains even in the dim light, and when he brushed his thumb across them, they were still damp. Blood. Real blood. He could smell it. He had seen the gash in her throat, all too horribly real, and though Maggie hadn't cried or made a sound afterward, he had also seen the suffering in her eyes. Slowly, John laid the jacket back across the bench, then went out of the room, easing the door nearly closed. He checked the rest of the house again, methodically, checked the soup. Then he returned to the living room, drinking coffee and broodingly watching a weather report that promised a wet and blustery night for Seattle. Chapter 18. Even though the weather had worsened by late afternoon, Jennifer and Kendra elected to keep searching for David Robeson rather than return to the station. They stopped at a small cafe for coffee and checked in with Andy and Quentin by phone, pleased to discover there was another possible lead in the search for the old black caddy that might or might not belong to the rapist. Even though Quentin sounded more frustrated than hopeful when he reported to his partner what little information they had so far. Nearly 50 old black caddies in the city, damn it. It's going to take time to run all the names through the computer, even to give us a place to start. Kendra, who knew her partner, merely said, "It isn't your fault Joey decided to take matters into his own hands." "Yeah? Then whose fault is it?" "He's a big boy, Quentin. A very big boy." Quentin didn't laugh. "And he never would have gone looking for this bastard if I hadn't pointed him in that direction." "You asked him to find out who claimed a kidnapping that never happened. That's all. Anything more is Joey's doing, not yours." Yeah. Quentin sighed. "Listen, you and Jen be careful out there tonight, okay? Watch your backs." "You know something?" Kendra asked bluntly. "No, I just have a very bad feeling about tonight." He sounded restless. Kendra, who had almost as much respect for Quentin's feelings as she did his premonitions, nevertheless thought he was probably letting his worries about Joey get the best of him. But all she said was, "We'll be careful. 2 transients we talked to about an hour ago swear they know David Robeson, and that he'll be at the Fellowship rescue mission tonight, so that's probably where we'll be." "Okay. Keep checking in, will you?" "You bet." Kendra turned her phone off and returned it to her shoulder bag, then filled Jennifer in on the relevant details. "Your partner sounds a little antsy," Jennifer noted. Kendra nodded. "Yeah, I give him another hour or so, and he'll be out here himself looking for Joey." "They're friends?" "That I couldn't tell you. All I know is that Quentin feels responsible for the guy, maybe because they knew each other as kids." "Baggage from the past. We all have that, I expect." Jennifer sipped her coffee. "True." Kendra looked out at the dreary streets and added, "It's already getting dark. I figure the shelters are getting busy about now." "Yeah, we'll give it a few more minutes, then go on over to the mission, okay?" "Suits me." It was raining when they left the cafe, the wind fitful as it gusted one moment and died off the next, and the temperature had fallen to hover only a few degrees above freezing. So it wasn't surprising that they found the Fellowship rescue mission to be a very popular place. "We'll have a full house, all right," Nancy Fraser told them. "I've already opened the rooms upstairs, put out all the cots and sleeping bags we've got." "We're still looking for David Robeson," Jennifer said. "Mind if we wander around and talk to people?" "It's fine with me, as long as things stay polite. Some of these people are a little uneasy around cops, remember?" "We'll keep it low-key," Kendra responded with a smile. "Thanks. I'd appreciate it." Fraser sighed. "We've already had a couple of arguments today. I knew it was tense out in the streets, but the nerves are coming inside now." "Because of the rapist?" Jennifer asked. "That's a big part of it, because 2 of the victims were found in this area, Because the women are frightened and the men are getting tired of the way the women are looking at them. Because we're heading toward the holiday season. Because the weather's really lousy. She sighed again. Take your pick. Somebody down the hall yelled for Nancy to come help get something unstuck, and she left the two cops with an apologetic grimace. If we split up, Jennifer said, we can get through here much faster. Mindful both of her partner's warning and the reason she was with Jennifer, Kendra said, maybe, but I say we stick together. If these guys are as tense as the director says, some of them might be in a more confrontational mood than usual. And they'll be less likely to take on both of us? Jennifer nodded. Yeah, you're probably right. Want to start down here or upstairs? Down here, I guess. It looks like the main room for the men is already full. They heard a sudden burst of laughter and a few colorful curses coming from that room, and Kendra added, rules or not, somebody always manages to smuggle in a bottle. My favorite pastime, Jennifer muttered sardonically as they moved toward the men's dormitory, arguing with a drunk or two. Maybe we'll get lucky and find David Robeson quickly, Kendra offered. But nobody was more surprised than she was when they did. In fact, find him 10 minutes later, after another man told them Robeson had gone upstairs to find himself a more private area of the house. Thinks he's too good for the rest of us, their informant sniffed, sounding quite insulted. The man sitting on the next cot disagreed. Nah, he don't think he's better'n us. He's just skittish as hell. Somebody dropped a shoe on the floor a while ago, and he damn near ran back out the door. Why is he nervous? Kendra asked. The man gave a thick chuckle. Says a ghost is after him, so you'd better not say boo to him, ladies. He cackled happily at his own wit. Jennifer and Kendra exchanged glances, then thanked the men and made their way back out of the dormitory and to the front stairs. After all this, Jennifer said, if the guy turns out to be completely delusional, I'm going to be really pissed. I know what you mean. They climbed the stairs to the second floor, encountering the director in the hallway. When they reported what the men downstairs had told them, she said, if he's looking for more privacy, he may have taken one of the small back bedrooms. Several of them haven't started to fill up yet. They looked into 2 such bedrooms, finding one occupied by a snoring man who didn't come close to matching the description they had, and the other still empty. In the 3rd room they checked, the most isolated bedroom in the house. They found David Robeson. Jennifer realized instantly why Terry's description had been so unhelpful. Robeson looked like 2/3 of the men presently at the shelter, virtually interchangeable with them. He could have been any age between 30 and 50. He was hunched and thin, wearing shabby clothing too lightweight for the weather, and both his rather wild hair and his thick beard were nondescript brown with threads of gray. His eyes were heavy-lidded, a muddy brown color, and more than a little bloodshot. Also, like so many of the men in this place, he was uneasy in the presence of police, literally backing himself into a corner of the small room and clutching in front of him an ancient canvas duffel that apparently contained all his worldly possessions. Working together instinctively, the 2 women separated a bit as they came in, with Kendra moving a couple of feet to one side to lean casually against a low chest, and leaving Jennifer to step closer to Robeson. It was a tactic designed to make him feel less threatened, but it only half worked. His eyes moved nervously back and forth between them almost continually. I didn't do nothing, he protested, as soon as Jennifer told him who they were. We know that, David, she replied soothingly. We'd just like to ask you a few questions, that's all. About that ghost you saw a few weeks back. He stiffened and pressed himself even tighter into the corner. I didn't see nothing. Whoever said I did is a liar. Jennifer hadn't expected it to be easy, but nevertheless stifled a sigh. You aren't in trouble, David. I promise. Nobody wants to hurt you. We'd just like to know what you saw that night.
You were on the catwalk, weren't you? Sleeping in that old warehouse? And you looked out the window? Not being in a courtroom, she didn't have to worry about leading her witness. All she wanted was something, anything, that might help her find, or at least identify, the rapist. He swallowed visibly and made a little sound in the back of his throat, a frightened sound. He went to drown the puppies. I know he did. He went to drown them, and now he's looking for me. We won't let him find you, Jennifer reassured him. You're safe here. Did he have the puppies in a sack, David? He nodded jerkily. Yeah, a bag. Carried it over his shoulder. And you saw them moving? Poor things. Poor little things. He'd already hurt 'em because they was bleeding. I saw the blood on the bag. He never liked dogs. Never liked 'em at all. Probably because they didn't like him. Dogs know who's good. Dogs know. Jennifer tried not to let the excitement she felt alter her relaxed and unthreatening tone. It was night, David, and you weren't close. How did you know it was blood you saw? I saw it. I smelled it. Wary of getting him too agitated, she tried another tack. Did you see him when he got to the building, David? Did you see his car? Robeson clutched his duffel closer to his chest with one arm, while his free hand plunged into the bag and brought out a ring of rusted keys. Do you think he dropped these? I think he dropped these. I'll give them to him when he comes to get me, and maybe he'll leave me alone. Do you think he'll leave me alone? He likes keys. Jennifer glanced at Kendra, finding the agent studying Robeson with a faint frown, then returned her attention to the man as she wondered if she was asking the right questions. You never knew, not with a witness like this one. The car, David. Did you see it? He stared at the keys in his hand, then dropped them back in the bag and began rummaging again. It was here. I know it was right here. David, did you see the car? What? Oh. He took the puppies out of the trunk. You saw that? What color was the car, David? Black. Black as the inside of hell. Big son of a bitch, too. Maybe a Lincoln, I don't know. Jennifer drew a breath and probed carefully. So he carried the bag of puppies into the building. Did he have the bag when he came back out, David? Had the bag, but it was empty. He drowned the puppies and left them in there. I told you that. He snapped suddenly. I'm sorry, David. I'd forgotten. She paused and said, You know who he was, don't you? You know who the ghost was. He made another of those frightened sounds in the depths of his throat. Dead. They said he was dead. But the devil can't die. I know he's the devil. I know it. I saw him one time. Saw him looking at her. And there was nothing in his eyes. Nothing. Why was that? He demanded of Jennifer suddenly, desperately. Why was there nothing? I don't know, David. Maybe if you told me who he is. No. If I tell you, he'll know. He always knew. Always. Always watching. Smiling. Always knew when I messed up the code. The muddy eyes shifted between Jennifer and Kendra, worried, fearful, increasingly anxious. I'm a good programmer. I am. He knew that, even though he got me fired. David, you're going to tell him I'm here, aren't you? You're going to help him get me. No, David. We just want to. It happened with horrifying suddenness. The duffel bag fell to the floor, and Robeson was holding a pistol, his hand shaking so badly that it was pure chance it was aimed toward anything at all when it went off. Jennifer was moving, reacting instinctively as she lunged toward him, dimly aware that Kendra was moving as well. Both of them were just a little too far away and just a heartbeat too slow in reacting. The bullet tore through the sleeve of Jennifer's coat and slammed Kendra back against the wall. Sometime around 8, John heard the shower, and by the time Maggie came out, he had the soup ready for them. She looked more fragile than he'd ever seen her. Faint purple shadows under her eyes, despite the sleep, and far too much tension in the set of her shoulders. He could still see a thin red line across her throat. "You didn't have to stay," she said at one point. "Finish your soup." Maggie looked at him for a moment, cat-like golden eyes grave, and silently did as he ordered. "Now I understand why you never walked through Christina's apartment after she died," he said suddenly. "Because she died there. Because you would have felt it." "Yes. I wasn't sure it would happen, that I'd feel all of it, but there was a chance, especially since I felt some of what she felt when she was shot, even though I was nowhere near there when it happened, and even without the connection I felt to Christina, what I was sensing had been getting so much stronger, so much more intense with every day that passed." She shrugged a bit jerkily. "I'd started being careful about crime scenes even before she died, just to be on the safe side." "You should have told me that." "You wouldn't have believed me." John knew that was true, so he could hardly deny it. He remained silent while they finished the meal. He cleared up afterward, sending her to the living room with coffee, and joined her there a few minutes later. She was curled up on one end of the couch, the overlarge black sweater and dark sweatpants she wore making her skin appear even more pale than usual, and her hair more vibrant. When John joined her on the couch, she was looking at her hands and said absently, "I feel like Lady Macbeth. All that blood on my hands. I can still smell it." Steadily, he said, "All I smell is lavender soap." She tucked her hands down between her knees and shifted her gaze to his face. "It's supposed to be soothing and relaxing, that scent. Usually it is." "Maggie, maybe you should go back to bed." "No, I don't want to be alone. Do you mind?" "Of course not. But you didn't get enough rest." "Enough for now. It was the first time in days I was able to really sleep, probably because I knew you were here. Have I thanked you, by the way?"
"For what? For staying?" "I wanted to, Maggie."
"For staying, and for pulling me out of that building. I don't know if I could have gotten out if you hadn't been there."
"Promise me you won't ever do that again. Go into a place like that alone."
"No, I won't." Her smile was a little shaky. "I wouldn't dare. Not after this. That was very scary." John would have chosen a stronger word, but all he said was, "For me too." "I'm sorry." She lifted her hands and looked at them again, as if she couldn't help herself.
"The blood's gone, Maggie."
"Yes, I know." She allowed her hands to fall, to rest on her thighs, but kept her gaze on them. He hesitated, not at all sure if he was ready for this, for any of this.
"We don't have to talk about it."
Maggie smiled again, wry this time. "Okay."
"I didn't mean... Maggie, it's not that I doubt what you can do."
"I know. You're just very uncomfortable with it." Trying to keep it light, he said, "Stop plucking my feelings out of the air, will you?" She looked at him finally, that wry little smile lingering. "One of the major drawbacks of getting too close to an empath, I'm afraid."
"It's not something I expected," he confessed.
"I don't mean to invade your privacy. I'm sorry." He shook his head.
"I don't have any no trespassing signs, not where you're concerned. It just takes some getting used to, that's all."
I know it does."
He wasn't saying any of what he wanted to say, and his own inadequacy disturbed him. All too aware that the wrong words would hurt her, still unsure if he was ready for this, he watched her turn her restless gaze to the muted television. "More rain," she murmured. "Always rain. People in Seattle don't tan. They rust," he finished. "I keep forgetting you grew up here." "I've thought about moving back. Oddly enough, I miss the rain." It picked up outside just then, drumming against the roof of Maggie's small house, and she nodded. "I think I'd miss it too. It's a very soothing sound." The silence that fell between them wasn't particularly soothing, and John didn't have to be a psychic to feel that. There was too much left unsaid, and yet he knew they were at a turning point, a crossroads come upon so suddenly that neither one of them had been prepared for it. "Maggie, we really don't have to talk about it," she said. "About any of it. Too much has happened for either of us to be sure of anything right now." This time, he didn't hesitate. "I'm sure of what I feel. I'm just not sure of what you feel. I mean," he shook his head as she looked at him, wryly aware that he was as awkward as a teenager facing, for the first time, the girl who was so desperately important to him that every word spoken took on terrifying significance. "Maggie, you feel so much of other people's emotions, other people's pain. I can't help wondering if you even have the energy left to feel for yourself." She was obviously surprised, a little puzzled, even uneasy. She didn't duck the question. "Sometimes it's easier to be alone." "Because there's been too much of other people's feelings? Because when you're alone you can find peace?" "Is that so wrong?" John hesitated, then reached over and brushed back a strand of her hair, allowing his hand to linger against her face. "God knows I can't blame you for making that choice. But it's an unbalanced existence. You said it yourself, Maggie. Life is about balance. How can you go on giving and giving of yourself, your energy and compassion and empathy, without at least sometimes taking something for yourself?" "Because it isn't that simple." Her eyes were steady, the curve of her mouth a little vulnerable. "I'd ask you to give as well as take." She half nodded, agreement, but also an obvious pleasure in the touch of his hand against her skin as she moved. "People do. It's only fair. I just don't know how much I can give right now." "And if I said whatever you can give will be enough?" "I don't think I'd believe you." She drew a breath. "Anyway, it doesn't matter. This wouldn't even be happening if you hadn't been shaken up by today." "The hell it wouldn't." John didn't give her a chance to argue, just pulled her into his arms and kissed her. Maggie had told herself almost from the day she had met John that if this happened, she'd be able to stop it. Really easy. Just say no. Tell him she didn't want this, didn't want him. Tell him she wasn't the slightest bit interested in acquiring a lover. Thank you very much. Even if it wasn't love, even if it was only desire, passion was very clearly and very certainly something she didn't need in her life. She had been very sure of that. She had been very wrong. To her astonishment, it was about warmth as much as it was passion, about the simple, necessary human lifeline that was the touch of flesh on flesh. Her body, racked so often and so long with the pain of others, craved the healing warmth of him, the pleasure he created just by touching her. And her weary spirit longed for the closeness, the intimacy he offered. There was no pain in this, no fear, no darkness. There was nothing but elation and the certain knowledge that some things really were meant to happen. Without knowing if she had moved or he had moved her, she found herself on his lap,
her knees on either side of his hips. She felt his hair, silky between her fingers, felt his mouth hungry and insistent on hers. She felt his hands slip under her sweater and touch her skin, felt them slide upward slowly until they could close over her breasts, and heard a little sound escape her, so eager it almost embarrassed her. Almost. John drew back just far enough to look at her. His eyes darkened to emerald and so intense she couldn't look away. "Just give what you can, Maggie," he said, roughly. "I swear I won't hurt you." She touched his face with both hands, almost as if she were blind and needed her sensitive fingertips in order to see. She touched his mouth, and then her lips followed, teasing his, taking his. "I never thought you would." November 8th, 2001. As promised, the rain grew even heavier after midnight, and the wind began to whine and moan like something lost and lonely. Maggie didn't mind. Her lamplit bedroom was warm and tranquil, at least for the moment, and she was discovering how good it felt to lie close to someone else in an intimate and peaceful bed. It felt very good. She wanted to hold on to this, to make the moment last, and knowing it couldn't made it all the more achingly sweet. John shifted position slightly and rose on an elbow to look down at her. "You're very quiet." She smiled. "Listening to the rain, wishing the night could last a little longer than it will." "There's that fatalism again," he said, intentionally light. "Sorry. Character fault, I'm afraid. But the morning will come, John." "And then the next morning, and the one after that. Mornings don't mean endings, Maggie." "Sometimes they do." "Not this time." He shifted again, pulling her closer so that his forearms were beneath her shoulders and his fingers could tangle in her long, thick hair. "I don't intend to lose you." Maggie responded as she had to when he kissed her, her arms going up around his neck and her mouth every bit as urgent as his. It was rather terrifying, she thought dimly, that he could have this effect on her when she had known him barely a week. Then again, sometimes a week was a lifetime, and sometimes knowledge had nothing to do with time. There was nothing of the normal awkwardness of new lovers between them, no fumbling or uncertainty. He knew without asking what would please her, just as she knew what would please him. Yet even as Maggie knew that to glide her fingertips up his spine would elicit a shudder of need, there were also the still unfamiliar sensations of this particular body against hers, unexpectedly hard and powerful. She knew he was a silent, intense lover, yet there was also the discovery that her voice murmuring his name had the power to affect him like an actual physical caress. And just when she was certain he couldn't possibly make her feel more than she already had, he did. "It's obvious to me," she murmured a long time later, "that you didn't spend all your time building a business empire." John chuckled and drew her a bit closer to his side. "A man has to have hobbies." "Ah, and naturally you applied yourself to those hobbies with all the energy and dedication at your command." "Naturally." "Well, none of it was wasted." "Thank you. You're not so bad yourself." He hesitated only a moment. "Maggie." "Don't say it." She kept her voice quiet. He was silent, then murmured, "Because you already know?" "Because I don't need to hear it. Not now. Later, when it's all over. Tell me then, all right?" John didn't answer aloud, just wrapped both his arms around her and held her, wide awake as he listened to the wind moan outside. Chapter 19.
I should call John and Maggie, Andy said. No, let them sleep. Quentin glanced up at the big clock on the wall, then shifted restlessly on the uncomfortable couch in the hospital's waiting room. It's nearly 3. Besides, there's nothing they could do. Andy watched him. She'll be all right. You heard the doctor. Stable enough for surgery, and he didn't anticipate any complications. So why is it taking so long? Quentin looked at the clock once again, frowning. His face was drawn, the anxiety in his eyes obvious. He said it could be hours, Quentin. You know that. Yeah. Jennifer came into the waiting room and immediately asked, Any news? Not yet, Andy told her. Still in surgery. What about Robeson? She sat down beside him on the couch across from the one Quentin occupied. Under restraints and sedation, he won't be any help anytime soon, at least not verbally. But when we ran his prints, we did find out that about 4 years ago he was employed by one of the electronics companies in the city, a big one. They run 3 shifts, but I had to get the personnel manager out of bed so he could give me a list of employees working for the company at the same time. We're comparing it to the list Kendra had put together of every person even remotely connected to the victims or the investigation. So maybe this ghost he was so afraid of will turn up. Maybe. She shrugged, her gaze moving to Quentin. He did specifically say the ghost had gotten him fired and mentioned being a programmer, and I do believe he saw somebody go into that building, somebody who was carrying something in a sack that was moving. So maybe it'll turn out to be a worthwhile lead after all. Quentin stirred slightly and said, It was a worthwhile lead. Stop blaming yourself. I should have at least checked to make sure he wasn't armed. She responded, her voice tight. We knew he was paranoid, jumpy as hell, and the way he was clutching that duffel, I should have at least taken it away from him. You couldn't have known. Jennifer looked as if she wanted to continue protesting, but just shook her head, silently. Quentin repeated. You couldn't have known. No one can be on guard all the time against the unexpected. And there were 2 of you there. Don't forget that. From what you told us, it was pure chance Kendra was the one who got hit. He's right, Andy told Jennifer. She grimaced. That doesn't make it any easier. Yeah, I know. Andy looked back at Quentin. Shouldn't you report in? Call your boss? We tried to keep it quiet, but you know as well as I do that by morning the media will know an FBI agent was shot while questioning a witness. I'll call it in when we know something. Where the hell's that doctor? He said he'd talk to us as soon as the surgery was finished. Andy answered patiently. Yeah, right. A silence fell that none of them was willing to break, and the clock quietly ticked away the minutes. It was just after 3:30 when the doctor finally came into the waiting room, tired but satisfied. We're not out of the woods yet, but everything looks good, he told them. We were able to extract the bullet and repair the damage. She'll have to take it easy for a while, but there should be no complications. And we have an excellent trauma therapist on staff to help her through the emotional aftereffects of having been shot. Can I see her? Quentin asked. Not until she comes out of recovery, and that'll be hours yet. He looked at all of them, adding, My advice would be for you to get some sleep and come back later in the morning. Believe me, there's nothing you can do here, and we'll call if there's any change. Thank you, Doctor. When they were alone again, Andy said reluctantly, We should all be back at the office. The search for that caddy is narrowing, and the lead Jen and Kendra were following could pay off at any time. I know. Quentin shifted his shoulders as if to ease tension that refused to leave him, despite the good news. And with every hour that passes, we're less and less likely to find Tara Jameson before he kills her. You 2 go on back to the station. I want to have another word with the doctor before I call Quantico and report in. You sure? Yeah, go ahead. I'll be along in a few minutes." After they left him, it took Quentin less than 5 minutes to find the surgical recovery area and Kendra. Between the lateness of the hour and his inborn ability to slip into places unnoticed, he was able to reach her bedside without being challenged. She was either still sedated or sleeping deeply, and he didn't try to wake her. He just stood looking down at her for a long time, without moving, his face bleak. "Sir, you shouldn't be here." The nurse's voice was low, but authoritative. Quentin looked at her, saw her take a half-step backward, and made a conscious effort to tone down the savagery he was afraid she had seen, and smile reassuringly. "Yes, I know. It's all right. I'm leaving now." Hesitant, the nurse said, "She'll be fine, sir." "Yes. Thank you, nurse." He sent a final look at Kendra, then left the room without another word. He went directly to his rental car in the parking lot near the emergency room and started the engine, but didn't move the car. It was a long time before he reached for his cell phone and punched in Bishop's familiar number. Jennifer poured herself another cup of coffee, afraid to stop and try to figure out how much she'd consumed in the past couple of days. It was barely 6 a.m. on this cold, dreary Thursday in November, and she had had enough caffeine in her system to stay awake until Christmas. Not that she expected to sleep between now and then, anyway. Scott came into the room looking as tired as the others, but considerably more dusty. "If I never see another file again," he announced, "it'll be too soon." Jennifer felt a stab of guilt. "I should have been helping you, Scott. Sorry." "Don't worry about it," he grinned. "I'll get even later." "The question is," Andy said, "did you find anything helpful?" Triumphant, he said, "I found out what happened in 1894. Well, sort of." Sitting at the conference table at Kendra's laptop, Quentin looked at him in respect. "How in the hell did you do that? The computer databases haven't coughed up a damn thing." "Punch in Boston," Scott advised. "Kendra's the expert with this beast," Quentin said as he scowled at the laptop. "But I'll try." Andy said, "What did you find out, Scott? And how?" He grimaced. "How is simple enough. That box of miscellaneous files I've been going through. I found the police report of the 7th victim from 1934. He opened the folder he was carrying and produced a photograph of a young woman with dark, curly hair and striking dark eyes. It didn't take more than an exchange of glances to confirm that she was completely unfamiliar to all of them. Andy sighed. Why did I hope at least one of us might recognize the face of the next possible victim, so we could do something about it before he grabs her? "Wishful thinking," Jennifer said. "It was always a real long shot, Andy. You know that." "Yeah." He watched Scott pin the photo on the bulletin board in its proper place in the line of 1934 victims, then said, "But she was killed here, right? In Seattle? So how did you find anything about Boston in 1894? "One of the investigating officers in 1934 put a note in the file, apparently out of frustration more than anything else. Said he'd tried everything he could to think of to find the bastard killing Seattle's young women, even thoroughly checking out all the family members of the victims despite their lack of motive, because his father, who had also been a cop, had told him about some murders that took place in Boston 40 years before, murders that sounded eerily similar to the ones here, at least as far as what was done to the victims." Quentin frowned at him. "So why did the cop focus on family members?" "Because in the Boston murders, it was apparently the brother of at least one of the victims who committed the crimes." Scott shrugged. He was vague on the details, just said these killings were different in some ways, but he was desperate, willing to try anything, so he checked out family members. And? Well, nothing more in that file. I still have more to look through, and we don't know anything about the 8th victim. Maybe there'll be more info in that folder, assuming I can find it. Quentin looked at the humming laptop. It'll take this thing a while to check the historical databases again, even with a specific city and date. I'm going to keep looking for the file on the 8th victim, Scott said. Maybe there'll be more info that might help us. Get a shower and breakfast first, Andy told him. And maybe sleep a couple of hours, at least. I will if you will, Scott said dryly, and left the conference room before Andy could respond. With a sigh, Jennifer said, We're all going on caffeine, adrenaline, and nerves. Much longer, and none of us will be worth a damn. She got up. I'm going to see if we have anything useful yet on that company Robeson worked for. Andy's phone rang as she left, and he answered it with a hopeful expression that very quickly turned to grimness as he listened. Finally he said, Okay, yeah. Tell him we're on our way. He cradled the receiver and muttered a curse under his breath. Quentin lifted a questioning brow. They found Tara Jameson? No. Andy hesitated, then said, But they found somebody else, Quentin. At least, it sounds like... After a moment, flatly, Quentin said, Joey. Yeah, I'm afraid so. Quentin didn't say anything during the trip with Andy out to the waterfront location, and after a glance at his face, Andy didn't try to open a conversation. He thought fleetingly that the seemingly easy-going, humorous man beside him would be a very, very dangerous enemy, and he was glad they were on the same side. It wasn't the first time he'd thought that. So he said nothing until he parked the car near a cluster of other police cars not too far from where I-90 crossed over Lake Washington from Mercer Island. It was a fairly congested area, so it wasn't surprising that the body had been discovered so early by an unlucky jogger. Andy said, Given the tides, there's no telling where he was dumped into the water. The southern end of Lake Washington, probably, but that covers a lot of territory. Quentin nodded, but said nothing as they approached the taped-off area near the water's edge. Andy stopped to talk to the detective in charge, but Quentin went on until he could look down on the body sprawled on the rocks, half in and half out of the water, face up. Cause of death was obvious. There was a gunshot wound to the center of the chest, and another between the eyes. Quentin didn't have to hear the medical examiner explain it to know that the first shot had been to the chest and had failed to stop Joey. Quentin hadn't known many men capable of withstanding what should have been a mortal injury, but he had no doubt it hadn't stopped Joey. It had taken a second bullet to do that. Ah, Joey, he murmured. Andy joined him. He had your card, which is why they called me. He shrugged when Quentin looked at him. Word's got around already that the Bureau is helping out on the rapist investigation, so they knew who to call. How long's he been dead? Quentin asked, matter-of-factly. Preliminary estimate is 8 to 10 hours, give or take a couple. Sometime last night. Quentin turned his gaze to the lake before them, frowning. So it didn't take him long to find whatever he found. Maybe he was near the water when he was shot, and maybe not. Yeah, doesn't narrow the possibilities much. Not unless we can place an old black caddy fairly close to the waterfront. You think he found it? Don't you? Andy grimaced. I think it'd be stretching coincidence too far to think somebody uninvolved killed him right after he started looking for the caddy. Agreed. Quentin's mouth was a thin, grim line. So let's find that goddamn car. Jennifer met them back in the conference room, still obviously wired with caffeine, and announced, Maggie just called. She and John are on their way in,
and the computer sifted through the information on that electronics company, but so far nothing. No name matches up to any on our list of family, friends, or acquaintances of the victims. Now I'm going over the list myself. I don't trust these damn machines. The damn machine on the conference table beeped just then, and Quentin went to study the laptop screen. Okay, we have a couple of very brief articles from a Boston newspaper, 1894. A man named Robert Graham is suspected of murdering his entire family. He looked up suddenly. 7 sisters and his own wife. Any more details? Andy demanded. Quentin nodded and looked back at the screen. A few. It was a fairly big story at the time, especially since nobody had a clue why he did it, and because he'd already vanished when they found the bodies. In those days it wasn't at all uncommon for even a large family of siblings to continue living together in the family home, especially if they remained unmarried. Apparently, none of Graham's sisters, all under the age of 25, had married or had jobs, and he was supporting them. Their parents had died, just the year before, as a matter of fact, in what was probably a flu epidemic. They believed the killings were spread out over a period of at least 3 days, that he probably tied up or in some way restrained and gagged all of them, then took his time killing them, beginning with his twin sister. They believed the wife was last. From the looks of it, he had tied her to their bed early on and left her there while he killed the others. She may or may not have been conscious and aware of what was going on. Christ. Andy muttered. Yeah. No descriptions of the victims, and precious few details of what he actually did to them, but they were all found with something covering their eyes. Either bits of their own clothing or sheets, towels, something like that. Jennifer drew a breath. So he killed his own family? Not what happened this time, with the victims all unrelated to each other. But he didn't want them to see or watch him, which is definitely like our guy, and apparently the killer in 1934. Quentin sat down at the table, rubbed his face briefly with both hands, and said, "Family members. Maybe the cop in 1934 was onto something." Andy objected. "But our victims are unrelated, like Jen said." "Unrelated to each other, yes. But maybe at least one of them was related to her attacker. All the relatives have alibis for at least one period of time in which we know this guy was either snatching another woman or spending a few hours torturing one," Jennifer pointed out. "Every single one of them. We triple-checked that." "What are we missing?" Quentin muttered. "There's something. A fact or question, so all this will make sense." Andy looked at Jennifer. The list of electronics company's employees was screened, but the computer was only looking for connections to family, friends, or acquaintances of the victims, you said. "Yeah." "What about the victims themselves? Were their names included?" "Sure. The computer said there was no connection." He sighed. "Shit." Quentin rubbed his face again and said, "You said you were going over the list yourself, Jen, and I say it's a good idea. Maybe you'll see something that escaped the mathematical logic of a computer." "Right." She immediately bent to the task. "Andy, do we have a copy of that DMV list of black caddies in the area?" "Yeah, it's right here." "Let's see if any of those names jump out at us." "We can't possibly be that lucky," Andy said, but handed over half the list to Quentin. They were all tired, too tired to be doing what they were doing. Not that it stopped them, of course, but the weariness did make Andy question what he thought he was seeing nearly half an hour later. "Reported stolen," he murmured. Quentin looked at him across the table. "What?" "There was a black caddy reported stolen 2 years ago. Never found." "Probably not so unusual," Quentin noted. "No, not that part. It's who reported it stolen, who it belonged to." "Who?" Before Andy could answer, Jennifer said, "Hey, hey!"
Do you know who used to work for the same electronics company as David Robeson, who was, in fact, his boss in the software design department? Slowly, Andy said, Simon Walsh. She stared at him. How'd you know that? Lucky guess. He reported his father's old black caddy as missing and probably stolen just over 2 years ago. I love a good coincidence, but this can't be one. Christina's husband, Jennifer said. Christina's husband was David Robeson's boss and had him fired, just like Robeson said. And he used to own a black Cadillac? Yeah. But he's dead. According to the record, yes. Andy looked at Quentin, which would explain why the computer didn't come up with a match. We didn't even have his name on our lists, since Christina was, or was supposed to be, a widow. It was a sailing accident, wasn't it, that supposedly killed him? Yeah. In fact, since I knew Christina and John, I came to his memorial service. Quentin shook his head. He was a sailing nut, often went out alone, even in bad weather. This time the storm won, and there were witnesses, of a sort. Another boat near enough to see Walsh struggling with equipment, see the boom swing and hit him, and over he went. The other boat pinpointed the area. There was a pretty massive search, and they recovered his boat mostly intact, but he was never found. As I remember, John hired experienced mariners and rescue people to search even after the official search was called off, but they had no better luck than the Coast Guard. Jennifer fumbled for a cinnamon toothpick and thought longingly of a cigarette. But Andy, she was his wife. You're saying he did that to his own wife? The rape? The acid? Softly, but with a distinct note of loathing in his voice, Quentin said, Vows don't mean much to sociopaths, Jen. After what you've seen him do, how can you doubt he'd balk at brutalizing a loyal and loving wife? Andy said, And wasn't Walsh some kind of computer genius? Quentin nodded. Electronic security systems would have been child's play for him. Jennifer was still protesting. If you're right about this, Christina was his second victim. Why marry her, then fake his own death a few years later, and not attack Laura Hughes until 1.5 years after that? Quentin said, He might have been drawn to Christina without really knowing why, and believed himself in love. Sociopaths don't feel the way we do, but they often pretend to feel, to live normal lives. He could have married her, intending to live that normal life, then either felt too confined or just too tired of the game. Faking his death was a nice dramatic way out of all the ties binding him, gaining him his freedom without any messy emotional confrontations. Then he sees Laura Hughes one day, Quentin continued, and something about her face triggers his psychosis. We can be pretty sure it's the way these women look that makes him single them out, even if we're not entirely sure what it is. He sees Laura and goes after her. Once he attacks her, once he begins to explore and satisfy his needs, his hungers, whatever restraints he felt before, would melt away. He not only has the taste of it, but possibly understands now why he was drawn to Christina, why her face attracted him in the first place, and she becomes his next victim. It sounded all too horribly likely, even to Jennifer. She stopped protesting. Andy drew a deep breath. Okay, we've got to start looking for a dead man. And we have to do something else. Yeah, Quentin said. We have to tell John. Hollis adjusted the sunglasses on her nose. They felt oddly loose, somehow. Looser than the bandage had been. We'll keep the lights out in here, Hollis, the doctor said, his voice both soothing and disappointed. We don't want to add any unnecessary strain. It may just take a little time, that's all, The muscles are working properly, and the pupils. The optic nerve looks fine. The eyes themselves are very bloodshot in appearance, but that's perfectly normal. Hollis thought he minded more than she did. "It's all right, Doctor. We both knew the odds." "I don't want you to lose hope, Hollis. In optical surgeries, there's often a period of adjustment when the bandages come off. Give it a little time, okay?" "I don't have any pressing appointments," she said lightly. He sighed. "I'll come back in a few hours, and we'll check again." "Sure." When she was alone again, Hollis turned her face toward the window. The blustery night had been followed by a miserable day, according to the nurses. Wet, dreary, cold. So she wasn't missing much, at least as far as the view out the window went. But she would have liked to see it. She really would have liked to see it. "Hollis?" "Hello, Annie. Were you around when the doc was here? I'm still blind, you know." Her voice was the same as it had been with the doctor, even and calm, almost placid. "Hollis, listen to me. Are you listening?" Sure, I'm listening." "You have to see." "I can't." "Yes, you can. The eyes are yours now, Hollis. They belong to you. They were a gift, so you could see. You must see." "But I can't. Just darkness. That's all I see." "Do you want to help Maggie?" Hollis sat very still, her fingers curling on the arms of the chair to grip hard. "You know I do." "Then you have to see, Hollis. But you have to see." Chapter 20. John didn't say a word in protest, as it was all laid out for him. But something changed in his face, and Maggie, watching him, could feel the pain. "I'm sorry, John," Quentin said. "We could be wrong." With a twisted smile, John said, "I hope you are. But somehow, it makes sense to me. It would explain so much, wouldn't it? How he got into high-security places, for instance. A snap for a computer genius." Reluctantly, Maggie said, "John, it could also explain Christina's death." He looked at her, and she felt another flash of pain that was quickly and ruthlessly shoved aside. Yes, it could. Of all his victims, Christina was the most likely to be able to identify him, given enough time. He must have known that. Must have realized, when she survived the attack, that he couldn't let her live. Especially if he got into the apartment and saw the work she was doing trying to find her attacker. It could also be why he didn't bother to go after Hollis Templeton or Ellen Randall a second time when they survived the initial attacks. He wouldn't think they had any chance of identifying him, so they were no threat to him. Maggie thought that if they both survived this, she would have to do something about this tendency of his to repress pain. But for now, all she could do was say, "If I'd been able to walk through her apartment afterward, maybe I could have seen all this." "It would have killed you," he said flatly. Andy, who had been mostly silent until then, said, "John, I swear to you, I believed Christina committed suicide." "I know that, Andy. You have nothing to apologize for." "Then why do I feel so rotten about it?" "Never mind. What we have to do now is figure out where Simon could be." Quentin said, "We've started on that. Given that he had access to quite a bit of money before his presumed death, it seems logical to assume that he planned carefully. I think we'll find evidence that he liquidated some assets and investments, and possibly sold property as well, before he took that boat out to die." John frowned. "Thinking back, I was a bit surprised there was so little money. Plenty for Christina to live comfortably, but given what he'd been earning with those cutting-edge software programs of his, I expected to find more. There was more, Jennifer announced as she came into the conference room. While some of the guys are looking for property he might have sold, I've been on another computer checking out his financial records in the months before his supposed death. Quentin was right. Simon Walsh was moving around a lot of money. No one amount large enough to raise any flags, but taken together it's pretty obvious he shifted a sizable portion of his net worth somewhere I haven't been able to trace. He put it in another name, Quentin said. He laid all the groundwork for disappearing long before he did. Andy said, I still don't get why he went to so much trouble to hide his face when he'd already blinded his victims. I mean, I could see him being extra careful with Christina, but the others? None of them knew him, right? Quentin said, I think wearing a mask and wig is tied in with why he blinds them. He doesn't want them to see, but even more, he doesn't want them to know it's him. And he's convinced they would know if they were able to see him, touch his face, even get a whiff of his natural scent, because he recognizes their faces somehow, or believes he does, and because he believes he knows them, he believes they could know him. It makes sense, I guess, Andy said, as much as this twisted bastard makes any kind of sense. So how do we find him? Jennifer demanded. Maggie half listened, without offering comment, as the others discussed various ways they might find Simon Walsh's secret torture chamber. What would it take, she wondered, to push a precarious mind even further into insanity? Maybe even break it for good. Was that an effective way to destroy evil? By splintering it so that not even its own will could hold it together any longer. Maggie? She blinked at John. He leaned slightly toward her, his hand coming to rest warmly on her thigh. Are you all right? I'm fine. She managed a smile. Just wondering why I couldn't see this. Couldn't see him. Christina had pictures of him, of course. She showed them to me. You couldn't see him because none of his victims ever saw him. He made sure of that. I know. Still. He squeezed her thigh gently, then leaned back and looked across the table to meet Quentin's gaze. Do you think we'll find him by figuring out what properties he sold before he faked his death? I think we've got a fair shot at it. To do what he does requires isolation and privacy, and he's got to feel safe there, certain no one will find him. Andy said, You know, he could still have Tara Jameson at that place. We haven't found a body yet, and he's had her barely 48 hours. Plus, we think he may have been interrupted if Quentin's source actually found him, or at least got close enough to draw his attention. So he could still be working on her. Maggie, remembering the painting, said, I don't think she's alive. But she could be. Which means, Quentin said, he could have a hostage. So assuming we do find a likely place where he might be holed up, we'll have to be damned careful approaching. Grimacing, Andy said, Yeah, no fucking SWAT team. If we blunder in and a victim dies because of it. He didn't have to finish that sentence, because all of them could do it for him. Half an hour later, they had a printout of a list of properties Simon Walsh had sold in the months before his death. It was a long list. So far, John said, it looks like different buyers, that at least half a dozen were sold to what looked like holding companies. It may take some time to find out who actually owned them. Of all of us, you're most likely to be able to find information on businesses without wasting time, Quentin noted. I can make some calls, John said. I still have plenty of contacts here in Seattle. He carried his copy of the list to the phones at the other end of the room. I'll go get a map, Jennifer said.
We can start pinpointing all these." Maggie studied the list, waiting for something to jump out at her. Even so, she was very surprised when something did. She knew this city, knew it well, but she wasn't certain why the address of a waterfront warehouse should leap out at her the way it did. Why? It was one of half a dozen other warehouses, at least 3 of them fairly remote or isolated. So why did this one feel so right? Because Quentin's friend Joey had been found at the waterfront? Or because of the sound? I know I heard another sound, a sound that bothered me somehow, because I recognized it, or thought I should have. Hollis had said that, and Ellen had said the same thing. Even Christina had mentioned hearing something she hadn't been able to remember. What had they heard? Maggie half closed her eyes, concentrating, trying to bring that faint, half-heard and half-understood sound out of the hodgepodge of impressions and sounds and scents stored in her own subconscious after all the interviews with the victims. Water. Water lapping against the pilings. Maggie looked around the room. John was on the phone, jotting down notes on a legal pad. Jennifer, Andy, and Quentin were bent over a map spread out on the table, carefully marking locations from possibilities on the list. Maggie looked at the list, then laid it down atop her sketchpad. There was only one waterfront location remote enough to provide the privacy and secrecy he needed. She should tell them. She knew that. There was really no excuse not to tell them. Her car was here at the station. John had driven her back there to get it this morning, both of them surprised to find the car not only intact, but apparently untouched, her sketchpad safely inside, and she had driven it here, where it was more likely to remain safe. She got up and went to pour herself some coffee, having already noticed the pot was empty. Picking it up with a shrug, she left the conference room, ostensibly to get more water. On her way out of the station, she left the pot on top of somebody's filing cabinet. "Well," Jennifer said, staring down at the map, now marked with numerous little red flags, "if we eliminate all the places that aren't remote or isolated enough for his needs, we end up with 6 possibilities, all warehouses or storage facilities of some kind." John joined them and said, "Only 3 of the addresses on this list are no longer in use, at least according to my sources." He bent over the map and pointed them out. "Here, these 3. Supposedly either empty or storing bits of equipment and machinery forgotten long ago." Quentin frowned at the map. 2 warehouses and 1 storage building. But only the 2 warehouses are remote enough to satisfy his requirements, I'd guess, and they're miles apart. "So which one do we check first?" Jennifer asked. Before anyone could offer a suggestion, Scott spoke from the doorway, his voice strained. "Where's Maggie?" John looked around swiftly, realizing only then that she had been out of the room far too long. "She's—" He steadied his voice, something in Scott's face sending cold fear through him. "She went to get more water for coffee, I think." "Why?" "I found the file on the last victim from 1934. Quentin was frowning at him. "And?" Scott opened the folder he carried and silently held up a photo all of them could see clearly. All too clearly. The last woman killed in 1934 could have been Maggie's twin. "Christ!" John breathed. And he knew, even before they looked for her, that Maggie was no longer in the building, that she knew or guessed where Simon would be and had slipped away to face him. Responsibility. Atonement. "She's gone after him," he told the others, hearing the hoarse fear in his own voice. "Alone?" Andy stared at him,
In Christ's name, why? John shook his head, unable to even begin to explain any of it right now. Just trust me. That's where she's gone. Quentin didn't waste time with questions, just said, "She hasn't got much of a head start on us, but if we're to catch up with her in time, we'll have to split up to check both warehouses." "No SWAT team," John said immediately, repeating Andy's earlier statement. "If a bunch of cops show up and she's there, he could—" He couldn't even finish the thought. Quentin said, "I agree." Andy groaned. "Shit." "Do you trust anybody else to go in with Maggie in the line of fire?" Quentin asked him. "No. Damn it." "Then it's us. John, are you armed?" "In my car." Andy scowled at him. "God damn it, John." John shrugged into his jacket. "Don't worry, Andy. I have a permit to carry, and I'm a good shot. Listen to me. If you shoot the man who killed your sister, there'll be a lot of sympathy, but if I shoot him, it'll be because I have absolutely no other choice. It won't be for revenge. Trust me on that." He looked at Andy steadily. "Shit. Okay. Jen and Scott will come with me." He stared at the map, at the 2 remaining flags. "Want to flip a coin?" Quentin studied the map for only an instant. "John and I'll take the waterfront warehouse." Andy looked at him. "Because of Joey?" "Yeah, because of Joey." "Let's go," John said. It didn't occur to Maggie until she got there that the warehouse might have been wired for security, but as she approached the place on foot after leaving her car nearly 100 yards back along the rutted road, she also realized that he would have done nothing to draw undue attention here. The isolation alone would protect him. That and the fence Maggie had scaled just after parking her car. It was still a gray, dreary day, cold, not raining, but almost, and nothing dry crackled under her foot to give away her approach. The warehouse she neared was a huge, hulking old building, part concrete and part rotting timbers, with a slate roof and very few windows. Maggie found the door easily enough, but paused with her hand on it, her eyes closing briefly. Useless not to admit she was terrified. Because he was in there, and because there might be a dying or dead woman in there with him, a woman Maggie wanted desperately to save if she could. If she could. What she couldn't do was open the door to those inner senses. They could give her an edge, or destroy her. They could help her find him, or kill her with another woman's mortal injuries long before he could get his hands on her. So she did her best to keep those inner senses firmly under control, shut deep inside herself and as inactive as she could possibly force them to be. It required almost as much focus and concentration to not use the senses as it did to use them, and she was all too aware that she wouldn't be able to do it indefinitely. A few minutes, maybe. Maybe. She drew a deep breath, then slowly pulled the heavy door open. The hinges didn't creak. Inside was darkness, but as she stepped in and eased the door shut behind her, her eyes quickly adjusted. She could smell old machinery and dust. And blood. It stopped her, but only for an instant. She picked her way carefully among splintering crates and looming pieces of rusting equipment, gradually getting a feeling for the size of the place, and seeing, finally, a light in the distance. She moved toward it, cautiously, becoming aware that he hadn't enclosed the space in which he worked. Perhaps he was claustrophobic. He had been before, she remembered. Hated enclosed places, just hated them. When had that been? 1934? At the very beginning, in 1894? She wasn't sure. Her memories of other lives were only instincts, flickering bits of knowledge, precarious certainties. The universe refused to make it easy for her.
He had picked a warehouse with soaring spaces above and arranged his working space within walls made only of old crates and unused equipment in an area near the waterside end of the building. A work table with various tools and ropes and bottles of unidentifiable liquids. A gurney off to one side, presumably so that he could wheel his victims out to whatever transportation he used. And in the center of the space, it looked obscene, a double bed with carved oak head and footboards, and beside it, a chair, a beautifully upholstered wingback chair, with a footstool. From her angle, Maggie could see a woman's wrists raised and tied to each side of the headboard, but she couldn't see if Tara was alive or dead. And even with her inner senses closed off, she could feel pain. Pain from this victim and those who had gone before her, distant whispers of agony so acute they had soaked into the very matter of this place, the particles that made it real. Maggie had to stop for a moment and press her hands to her mouth, concentrate on blocking, closing out, holding within. When she finally opened her eyes again, she saw him. He had come out of the shadows and was doing something at his work table, and even from here she could dimly make out a wordless humming, almost a crooning sound. When he turned toward the bed, she saw that he wore a plastic mask. Not a horror mask, but one with perfect, smoothly polished features, like those of a statue, white and lifeless. Female features. And the black wig he wore swept down on either side of the white mask, so that he had the creepy look of a mannequin. She also saw that he was holding a knife. Maggie took a quick step forward, then froze as a shadowy figure emerged from between two large crates near her, paused only to make a beckoning gesture to Maggie, and then flowed toward the work area. A slender, childlike woman with a heart-shaped face and delicate features and long, dark hair. Annie. Bobby. Bobby. He jerked to a stop, the eerily pretty white face turning quickly. Bobby. Understanding, Maggie eased her way to one side so that she would be approaching from a different direction, and then moved toward him, hoping her own voice wasn't shaking too badly, and sounded as eerie as Annie's when she called out, "Bobby, I'm sorry, Bobby. So sorry. I didn't mean what I said." She didn't know where the words came from. Memory. Instinct. The knife he held clattered to the stone floor, and he backed up another step, his physical posture one of tension and uneasiness, while that white face remained expressionless. He fumbled behind him on the table, then held out a gun in one black-gloved, shaking hand. Maggie wondered if it was the gun he had used to kill Quentin's friend Joey. "Bobby," Annie murmured sadly. "You hurt me, Bobby. Why did you hurt me?" She glided into the circle of light, facing him, confronting him. The nightgown she wore was fine linen and thin, and her feet were bare. "Why did you hurt me, brother?" He made an odd, harsh sound. "Bobby," Maggie called, moving toward them slowly. "Bobby, I didn't mean it when I said you weren't a man. I didn't mean to laugh at you." She cast a quick glance toward the bed and flinched at the blood-soaked mattress, the pale, thin body that was bruised and battered, the missing eyes. She couldn't tell if Tara was dead or alive. For an instant her control wavered, and she felt a jolt of pain so intense it nearly doubled her over. Desperately she struggled to shore up those inner walls, to close out the suffering she couldn't afford to share this time. "Bobby?" Annie glided another few steps toward him, holding out her hands beseechingly as she drew his attention away from Maggie. "I've been trying to find you, Bobby. I miss you so much." He made another choked sound, and this time ripped off the mask and wig. Maggie recognized him from the pictures Christina had shown her. He was an ordinary man with brown hair, a high forehead, and pale grayish eyes, slender but with wide shoulders and those oddly incongruous outsize hands, their power obvious, even gloved. Especially gloved. But otherwise, an ordinary man. "You're dead," he said hoarsely to Annie. Maggie moved into the light. "We're both dead, Bobby. You killed us. You killed us a long time ago." She was terrified. She was wrong about this. Terrified of not being strong enough to destroy his evil. Terrified of dying. He swallowed hard, staring at her now. "Deanna, I killed you. Why won't you stay dead?" His voice cracked. "Why in hell's name won't you stay dead?" Annie uttered a sweet laugh. "We're stronger than you, Bobby. We always have been. Didn't you know that?" Shattering the quiet, he fired 2 times directly at her. The bullets hit the crate behind her, splintering wood. She smiled at him. "We're stronger, Bobby. We'll always be stronger." "No, I'm stronger. I can kill you. I can kill you all." "You didn't kill me, Bobby," Hollis said, as she stepped out of the shadows a few yards to Maggie's right. He let out a sort of wail and backed up until he was up against the work table and could retreat no farther. "No. No, I can kill you. I did kill you." Without planning to, Maggie said, "And it doesn't do any good to blind us, Bobby. We see you. We always see you." "Always." Hollis echoed as she took another step toward him. Her eyelids were reddened, and the marks of the attack were only half healed on her face, but blue eyes gazed at him, clear and steady, and she wore a small, contemptuous smile. "Did you really think you could take my eyes, Bobby?" "I did," he muttered. He laughed suddenly, his own eyes gleaming with tears or madness. "I did. I took them. I cut them out. I did. I know I did. I put them in a bowl and watched them float. I took your eyes, Audra. They were brown eyes. I remember that. Brown eyes, and I took them. And you couldn't see me." "I see you now." Her voice was flat, cold. "I see you, Bobby. We all see you. You'll never be able to hide from any of us ever again." "No," he mumbled, the gun wavering, his wide shoulders hunching. "No, please." "We see you," Annie repeated. "We see you," Maggie echoed. He laughed, a strange high sound, and watching him, Maggie saw his eyes change. In those flat gray depths, something was coming apart, disintegrating. She felt a peculiar sensation, as if some force, some energy had blown past her, pressure more than air, nearly causing her ears to pop. It all happened within the space of seconds, and then, before she could move or react, that wavering gun pointed at her, steadied, and he whimpered. "No." Maggie had a split second to gaze into eyes that now held nothing but a kind of dumb hatred, and then a third shot echoed through the warehouse. She expected pain, waited for it. but the pistol in Simon Walsh's hand clattered to the floor, and he crumpled almost soundlessly. It was over. It was finally over. Before Maggie could do more than catch her breath, John was there, holding her hard with one arm, while the pistol in his free hand remained pointed toward Walsh. "Maggie." "For a minute there," she heard herself say with astonishing calm, "I thought you were going to be too late." "He nearly was," Quentin commented, moving out of the shadows near where Annie had been. He went to warily check for a pulse in Walsh, keeping his own gun at the ready, but relaxing when he found no heartbeat. "I didn't have a clear shot from my angle, so it was all up to him." "Tara." But Quentin was already moving toward the bed, and seconds later looked at them with grim eyes. "She's alive, but just barely." He took out his cell phone to quickly summon an ambulance, while Hollis joined him at the other side of the bed, helping him to gently untie Tara Jameson's wrists and murmuring soothingly to the terribly injured woman. "You two took a hell of a chance," John said, his voice jerky. "Jesus, Maggie." Maggie sent a fleeting glance around, unsurprised to find Annie gone, then smiled up at him. "I know. It was just something I felt you had to do. Yeah, I got that." He flicked the gun's safety on, then stuck the weapon inside his jacket and put both hands on her shoulders. He didn't shake her, but the desire to do so was evident in the way his fingers tightened. "Want to tell me how you thought you could win this little confrontation without so much as a big stick?" She shook her head. "I knew my face gave me an edge, that it would catch him off guard to see me here. It gave me the control, at least for a little while. I thought maybe the only way to fight his evil would be to shatter it, or at least the mind holding it. To have one of his victims face him, knowing all his secrets. It was the only thing I could think of to do. I had to try, John." "Just don't ever do anything like that to me again." "No, I won't." She looked at him searchingly. "I won't have nightmares about killing him," John assured her, "and no regrets. When you put a mad dog out of his misery, you're only doing him a favor." "You had no choice," she said anyway. "I know." He pulled her into his arms. "Are you all right? Even I can feel the pain in this place." Maggie considered, then smiled at him. "When you touch me, all I feel is you." "Good," John said, and kissed her. Nearly an hour later, Andy stood outside the warehouse with the others waiting for his forensics team to arrive and said, "So that was what evil looked like. I wasn't impressed." "No," Maggie said. He gazed at her with lifted brows. "No?" "No. That was just the shell evil lived in for a while." "You mean because he's dead now?" "Because the evil was destroyed this time before the flesh was." Andy blinked, looked at John and Quentin, then shook his head. "Never mind. I don't think I want to know what it was all about." "Wise of you," Quentin murmured. Scott joined them, saying, "The caddy is parked in that shed over there. A 72, looks like. Just what your friend Joey described, Quentin." He smiled faintly. "Yeah, he always did know cars." Jennifer asked, "How the hell did Hollis Templeton get here?" Since Hollis had left in the ambulance with Tara Jameson, she asked the question of the others. Maggie shrugged. She said a little voice told her she should be here, so she came. Didn't say how. "Jesus," Scott said. Andy looked at him, seemed about to say something, and then obviously thought better of it. He settled his shoulders with the air of a man deciding things.
Well, as far as we're concerned, Simon Walsh raped and killed women. He was the blindfold rapist." "Nobody's arguing with you, Andy," Quentin said mildly. "No?" "No." Andy heaved a sigh. "Good. Now, will somebody please tell me what the fuck I'm supposed to put in my report?" Quentin grinned at him. "You can try the truth. Of course, the truth is a bit complicated. I mean, what with Maggie and Hollis being here, to say nothing of Annie." "Annie?" "The little voice Hollis heard," Quentin explained solemnly. "She was here. Well, sort of." John looked at him. "So you saw her too?" "Oh, yeah." "Good. I was afraid it was just me." Andy stared at them both for a moment, and again, very obviously, decided he didn't want to know. They all heard the sounds of sirens approaching, and he groaned. "I'll either get a medal or get committed." "Welcome to my world," Quentin said. Epilogue, November 10th, 2001. Sitting up in her hospital bed to better talk to her visitors, Kendra said to Hollis, "So Annie was Robert Graham's twin sister, the first one he killed." "Apparently. I'd had her voice in my head since the attack. But it was only the last few days that she told me who she was and what she needed me to do." "I'm glad you were there," Maggie told her. "I think you were the clincher, standing there looking at him, even though he'd thought he'd blinded you for good." "I wasn't sure what I was doing," Hollis confessed. "Just saying whatever popped into my head." She shook her head. "Annie had told me I had to be there, that it was the only way to help you. When she told me that, told me I had to see or else he'd be free to go on killing, all of a sudden I could see. It was easy to distract the cop guarding my door, easy to slip out, and I knew, somehow, where to go." "You and Maggie," Quentin said. He looked at Maggie. "Thanks for sharing." "Don't you give me a hard time," she warned him with a faint smile. "I've already heard enough about it from John. I'm sorry I didn't tell you what I knew, or thought I knew. It was just that so much of it was vague or unclear. I was afraid if I said too much, I'd cause things to go even more horribly wrong." "We've been there," Kendra told her ruefully. "Sometimes we walk a very fine line between what we think we know and what's actually going on." Maggie nodded. "It can be a challenge. I mean, there were flashes of memory or bits of information I wasn't sure I could trust, but all I really knew absolutely for certain was that I had to be there at the end, confronting him." John said, "Because you'd been his wife long ago and weren't able to stop him from killing." Maggie looked at the others with slightly lifted brows. "He's having a hard time with this." "No, I'm not," John denied. He was stared at politely and finally sighed. "Okay, I am." "He'll get used to it," Quentin assured Maggie. "Between us, we've nearly worn away that high gloss of logic and rationality he used to wear." Hollis looked at John. "Aren't you grateful?" "Oh, immensely. The world's beginning to look almost normal standing on its ear." "It's all about balance," Maggie murmured. John took her hand with a determined air and said to the others, "If you'll excuse us, we have things to discuss." "Thanks for the visit," Kendra said, smiling. "We'll be back tomorrow," Maggie told her. "I'll look forward to it." As they left the hospital room, they heard Quentin saying to Hollis, "Listen, our boss should be here any minute, and he's sort of anxious to meet you." Maggie said, "Do you think she will? I mean, join Bishop's unit?" "You know her better than I do," John replied. "But from what I've seen, I'd say Hollis Templeton is very aware of having a brand new life stretching in front of her, and I doubt that after this she'll be eager to embrace the ordinary." "Very poetic. Thank you. And probably true," Maggie added. "There are certain corners that, having once been turned, change your view of the world forever." As the elevator doors closed and the car started downward, John looked at her gravely. "I'll say." She smiled faintly. "You're seriously considering it, aren't you? Helping to build some sort of civilian resource organization similar to Bishop's unit?"
"Quentin's had worse ideas," John admitted.
"Admit it. You're just beginning to enjoy seeing the world standing on its ear. That's what it is."
"Well, that's part of it. And there's you, of course. You're not about to stop doing what you do best just because that greater evil got buried this time around. And much as I respect Andy and the other cops, I think we both know that your talents deserve a broader canvas."
"So do yours, for that matter," she said. "Building the kind of organization Quentin was talking about won't be easy. Lots of strikes against it, beginning with the uneasiness most people feel about psychic ability."
"Which is why I'm perfect for the job. I know how to build organizations from the ground up, and I'm about as non-psychic as they come."
They left the elevator and walked down the bustling hallway toward the doors, and it wasn't until they were outside in the clear, chill air that Maggie stopped, looked up at him with a smile, and said, "It's all about balance."
"So I can say it now?"
he asked, smiling but intent. "You still don't have to." She slipped her arms up around his neck as he pulled her close, both of them oblivious to the people walking past them. "We balance perfectly. I love you, John." Just before his lips touched hers, John murmured, "That's all I needed to hear."
The end. You've been listening to Touching Evil by Kay Hooper, narrated by Elisa Bresnahan.